The atmosphere in the courtroom was heated to the max. The crowd, hungry for justice, settled under the windows, frantically demanded to punish the defendant. It is understandable, because the case was egregious and high profile. The murder of the businessman David Patrick Johnson stirred up not only the city, but the entire region. The son killed his own father. What can you say? The motive for the murder was banal and old as the world. Money, inheritance, in general the most base passions. All the media of the region were abuzz about this news. Newspapers were full of headlines. Millionaire's son went for murder. Son kills his father, or the story of how money drives you crazy, and so on. The news appeared in the yellow press as well as in the serious publications of Boston. The common people were outraged. These rich people have gone completely crazy, they said, in stores, hospitals, public transportation. They think that because they have money, they can do anything. And the most desperate came to the courtroom and poured out their righteous anger. Murder for life. Let the murderer rot in prison, they chanted. Jessica, the defendant's stepmother, had a confused look. How can this be? Her eyes said as she married Johnson. She already had a son, Michael, who also attended the trial. He was one of the crowd of gawkers, while Jason, the rich man's native son, sat in the dock. Now that was ridiculous. Jason glanced furtively at his half-brother. Their gazes met for a second, and Jason saw the contempt in Michael's eyes. He turned away quickly, and the accused's expression returned to one of detachment. The look in Jason's eyes made it clear that he was resigned to his fate. He knew that his chances of acquittal were minimal, or, more accurately, non-existent. The people who disliked the children of the rich had long ago given Jason a verdict, and all he could do was wait. And what is there to wait for when the defendant's guilt is undeniable? There was concrete evidence against him. On August 13, 1999, Jason Patrick Johnson was apprehended in his father's office with a bronze candlestick in his hands, the prosecutor said in a monotone. At the time of discovery, David Patrick Johnson was already dead. According to witnesses, the defendant was covered in blood. Jason covered his eyes. It was clear as day to those present, but it wasn't to him. The boy had a lot of questions. For example, who had called the police? A mystery no one would ever solve, because no one would want to. I mean, here he is, ready. Not even a suspect anymore, but an accused, a defendant. So why solve anything? The lawyer took the floor. Alas, a public defender. Stepmother didn't have a dime for a good lawyer. Well, it was understandable. Jason Patrick Johnson, will you tell the court what happened? He asked the defendant. Despite his pessimistic attitude, the son of the murdered businessman did not think of giving up in the hope of getting the necessary testimony. Jason had been hinted more than once that he was in a bad way. But as his father liked to say, as long as we are alive, there is always hope. And the defendant began his story. On the evening of August 13th, I entered my father's office. What was the purpose of your visit? Inquired defense counsel. I wanted to talk about the division of the spheres of business, Jason replied. Suddenly he realized with horror that the provocative questions were about to begin. The division of business. You could say that's a motive, but a word is not a sparrow. Well, there's my father lying there covered in blood. Yes, he died in my arms, and I took the candlestick by accident, but I didn't kill him. Why would I kill my father, who was everything to me? For inheritance. I would have gotten my share anyway. You would have, Michael replied. Good point, brother. Jason made what he thought were reasonable arguments, but in vain. Everything pointed to the fact that he was the killer. In the name of the Russian Federation, Jason Patrick Johnson, born in 1965, is sentenced to 20 years in prison. A gloating murmur ran through the room, and the defendant thought detachedly, well, that's it. The jury took into account neither Jason's cooperation with the investigation, nor the presence of a young daughter, whom he raised alone. Jason's wife died in childbirth. I'll be back, he said when he was given the last word. I'll be back. I'm gonna get justice. The press didn't even try to hide their smirks. It was too unbelievable. And everyone knew it when the convict was led away. He met Michael's gaze again and noticed the triumphant smile on his face. Why would that be? Or maybe it was just Jason's imagination that Johnson steps and turned away hurriedly, as if he didn't want anything to do with the killer. Tough luck, brother, Michael thought, and hurried out of the courthouse. Outside, the press was already waiting for him and his mother. No comment, waved away the newly appointed successor of the business from the representatives of the writing fraternity. Mother and son got into the car and drove away to the apartment, which was now at their complete disposal. 20 years had passed. Young, beautiful, expensively dressed brunette drove home, despite the fact that it was the second half of August. The heat outside was stifling. Jessica, the daughter of a wealthy businessman, drove up to the store to buy water and fruit. Today was her lucky day. Beautiful dark hair, pretty face. The girl noted with displeasure that the only place to park her foreign car was the corner, but there was nothing to do. Jessica turned off the engine and suddenly felt unbearably hot. It was weird. The air conditioning seems to be working, she thought. Why is it so hot? And when the girl smelled the smell of burning, she felt sick. But that was just the beginning. The car, literally cornered, suddenly caught fire and she was trapped. Jessica rushed to get out of the car, but there was no way. The plastic handle, which was already beginning to melt, did not give in, and the girl was almost resigned to the prospect of burning alive. But apparently there is a God in the world. A poorly dressed man appeared out of nowhere, homeless by the looks of it. Without wasting a second, he broke the glass and, risking his life, rescued Jessica from the fiery captivity. "Hurry up," he shouted, pushing the girl aside. The explosion could go off at any second. The car exploded a few seconds after the homeless man, along with Jessica, were a safe distance away. "Thank you so much." From the bottom of my heart, she thanked the homeless man. "After the shock, you're a very brave man." "No, really," he said, embarrassed. "No, really," exclaimed the girl. "After all, except you, no one dared to do such a deed. Tell me, how can I find you in case of emergency?" "In case of what?" hummed the homeless man, repeating Jessica's last words. Well, now she was embarrassed. "It's not a big deal. And I'm a stranger." Pilgrimy grinned. "Settled all this in the Boston train station area, so that's where you can look for me if you need me." She nodded with a smile, noting that her savior was quite young, perhaps even handsome. "And if you dress him up in decent clothes, oh God, I can't believe what I'm thinking," Jessica reminded herself. "I see," she nodded. "Good luck, and thank you." Likewise, the homeless man said, and walked away as if he'd never been there. Then the police, fire department, and tow trucks arrived. Jessica gave a statement, talked to the officers, and then called a cab and went home with a sense of accomplishment. "Why'd you take a cab?" Dad asked. "There's something wrong with the car," Jessica exclaimed, and recounted her misfortunes. "I see," he said dryly, and went into the house. She did not expect her father to be worried, and then offered her hot tea and a cozy warm plaid. In fact, there was no family connection between them. Michael was almost an uncle to Jessica. Why almost? Simple. He was the half-brother of her father, that is, Jason Johnson, who was convicted 20 years ago. Jessica knew that her own father had been sent to prison, from which he never returned. Michael's mother, Jessica Borisovna, had died a long time ago. As far as Jessica knew, she was terminally ill. The girl's foster father was a very unpleasant type. Michael constantly infringed on her and everything he touched. Jessica never received any pocket money from him, and those expenses, without which one way or another could not do without, were calculated literally to the cent. It was horrible. Jessica was so hurt, it was beyond words. If there was one thing he could save money on, it was his niece, his stepdaughter. The car Michael had bought her was a used car. He wouldn't have bought anything at all. But it is not proper for the daughter of a businessman to walk, ride the subway, not according to status. Her business acquaintances would have laughed at her, and the fact that the car is used, it's no big deal. No one would even check it, especially since the car looked quite presentable. Except, despite that, there was a fire. And if it hadn't been for that bum, Michael would have been preparing for her funeral. Jessica imagined for a moment what kind of funeral he would have organized, and he would have saved money. Cheap wreaths, cheap coffin. Naturally no music, let alone makeup. Jessica shuddered. Ugh, she thought. I can't believe she'd think of such a thing. Thank God I'm still alive. That's just black humor. But seriously, Jessica was very hurt. She'd grown up in a wealthy family, lived in a beautiful 2-story mansion, but she had absolutely no privileges. The girl knew that her peers from wealthy families, if not laughing at her, then discussed her outfits from no longer relevant collections, or the same unfashionable car that had burned so ignominiously in the parking lot. And she understood them perfectly well. And Jessica also studied at the university on a budget. However, she didn't care about that. The scholarship, of course, was ridiculous, but it was still a penny. From time to time, Jessica thought that the reason for such attitude of Papa and Michael to her was that her father was Woznan. But what was her fault? After all, children are not responsible for their parents. After taking a bath, she went to her room on the 2nd floor, turned on her laptop, intending to watch some romantic comedy. Her cell phone rang. Dad, what did he want? I wondered. Jessica, I've been thinking, Michael said. Anyway, Why don't you invite that tramp over for dinner?" "What?" was the girl taken aback. "Michael," what the foster father chuckled, "you gotta respect the man. After all, he saved your life. Why would you insult him?" The tramp was a man too. Jessica didn't think to object to the last argument. The tramp was indeed a man too. It was just that such an invitation was too atypical for Michael. Even the average citizen didn't consider a homeless man a human being for tea. And even homeless people weren't considered as such. It's not like he got his head screwed on a winter's day in the sun. The next day, Jessica went looking for the stranger, Pilgrim as the homeless man called himself. It was a pleasure to find the vagrant. Settled in the train station area, Jessica remembered his words, so look for him there. What? Let's start there, she reasoned. Her search led her to a kebab shop in Station Square, where she thought the employees might know the tramp by sight. She decided to approach one of them. "Jessica, excuse me, do you know a homeless man? Tall, skinny, but pretty tough." The Caucasian kebab maker's wide, stinging black eyebrows crept upward, and Jessica, realizing that she had said something stupid, hastened to clarify that he was quite young. The kebab maker, smiling with dazzling white teeth, asked, "Why would such a pretty girl need some tramp?" He winked and added, "I'd rather come over tonight. We'll go to my place, bathhouse, sauna, kebab, beer, champagne." Jessica, "No, thank you," she politely declined. "I really need this particular tramp, on business." "The kebab man, what's his name?" There was disappointment in the young Jigit's voice. Jessica just sighed. The fact that she had forgotten to ask for a name was a big omission, though how was she to know that a vagrant might be needed by her father? "Jessica, I don't know." The kebab man, confused, "Well, maybe there's a picture." Jessica shook her head. The kebab man, "Strange thing, no name, no photo. How do you look for them then?" "There are as many as slaughtered around here, but I can help." He smiled meaningfully. Jessica, overjoyed, "Really?" The kebab man, "Sure, just one kiss and I'll help you." Offended, Jessica walked away. It took 2 more days to find her. She was helped by an observant boy of about 11, also a vagrant. The boy asked in a businesslike manner, tall, stout, "Could that be Max Pilgrim?" Jessica rejoiced, realizing she was on the right track. "Jessica, that sounds like him. Do you know where to find him?" The boy mouthed importantly, "I know, but that information costs money." Jessica gave him some money. The boy nodded. "Then it's a deal," and led Jessica to some woods behind the station building. Julia suddenly thought that the boy had decided to take her into the woods and rob her. What if he killed her? Julia was suddenly terrified. She wanted to run away. But then something like a dugout came into view. "We'll stop here," said the young guide carelessly. "Give me the money." "But I haven't seen him," said the girl reasonably. "You think," said the boy approvingly. And they climbed inside. Michael Pilgrim was sitting at a table with a group of similarly poor people, eating quick noodles from a round paper bowl. An old electric kettle was boiling in the corner, standing on a large stump. "Hello," Julia greeted her savior, and, noticing his perplexed look, asked, "Didn't you recognize me?" "Should I? I mean, in general, to know you or should?" asked the tramp, which confused her very much. "2 days ago, you saved my life," she replied, pulling herself together. "There was a fire in my car, and you helped me out of it." "I did," Michael nodded. "As if it were no big deal, how could I ask for a light? And that my father told me to invite you to visit? He wants to thank you." "And I wanted," the tramp said firmly. "It's up to you, of course, but my father, you know," he said in a deep voice, "everything with you rich people is measured by money." Why do you say that? Julia thought money was out of the question, especially when someone like Papa David was involved. "Don't you want to thank me?" the enterprising boy reminded himself. "Yes, of course." Julia caught up and, taking $10 out of her purse, handed it to the young vagrant. He nodded in satisfaction. Then he was blown away. And Julia continued to persuade Michael. He was reluctant for a long time, but finally agreed. Why? The boy didn't know. Or maybe it was a premonition? Come in, David said, trying to sound like a hospitable host. Frankly speaking, Michael felt terribly uncomfortable. His gaze was too intense. It was like an X-ray. They went into the living room, where the table was set for 3 people. In the middle of the table stood a large plate of dumplings, a salad of tomatoes and cucumbers, and a basket of fresh bread. It all looked very appetizing. But the guest found such a table a little strange. It was not the way he had imagined a meal in a rich house. How could a vagabond know what wealthy people ate? Besides, he assumed that rich people might like homemade dumplings and simple salads. "Have a drink." David offered me a drink. "No, thank you." "I don't drink," Michael refused. "Maxim, you don't drink," said the host. "I think I'll have a gin and tonic." For about 20 minutes they were silent, concentrating on their food. The tramp ate carefully, without hurrying, and Julia liked it very much. "Actually, he doesn't look like a bum," it suddenly occurred to her. "Your name is Maxim, isn't it?" David asked his guest, even though the man had introduced himself to him. Maxim nodded. "Maxim, do you like Julia?" The tramp almost choked on his dumpling, and when he looked at the owner's daughter, he realized that she was close to the same. "And why this question?" asked the guest. "Well, just answer. Do you like it or not?" "Well, I like it," said Max. "Pretty, probably good character. And she's graduating from university this school year," David said proudly. "She's going to be a translator or something." "I'm happy for her," the homeless man nodded, not understanding what the questions were about. Julia didn't understand either, but she realized that her father had brought this up for a reason. "Oh, for a reason. I'm so glad," the landlord smiled. "Well, that's enough of that. I'd like to offer you Julia as my wife." "Well, a reward for what?" Max asked. "How could it be a reward for what?" "You saved her life," said the tramp. "I saved her life," said the tramp. All right, David said impatiently, thinking that the hobo was not so simple. "But it's okay. I've been screwed over before." "It doesn't matter," he said again. "I could use smart, capable guys like you, Maxim." "What about Julia?" David asked, perplexed. "Julia listens to me." So, looking at the girl, Max doubted it. Maybe she had obeyed her father before. This time, however, judging by the look on her face, she was the least likely to do so, and he wasn't far from the truth. "I always knew I wasn't loved," David sighed. Julia pondered. But this was too much even for him. How is it possible to marry without her knowledge? It's just unbelievable. "Isn't it, Julie?" he asked his daughter with pressure. "Daddy, I'm Julie, and I didn't know what to say," the girl admitted. In good conscience, I should have objected, but my tongue felt like it was stuck to the sky, and it was useless. If David Patrick Johnson had something in his head, then that was his final decision. Michael had enough of sitting. He got up and walked around the living room while father and daughter talked. The vagabond looked at the pictures without much interest, more of a machine. Suddenly one of the pictures caught his eye. "But it can't be," Michael thought, looking into the young man's face, unable to hold back the tears that came to his eyes. "Is something wrong?" Johnson inquired, noticing the look on his face. "Nothing's wrong," assured his guest, coping with his emotions. Michael sank into thought. The young drifter hadn't even realized that there were hidden sect cameras throughout the house. David Patrick Johnson had been suffering from persecution mania since childhood. He himself, however, he did not think so and said that he has a well-developed instinct of self-preservation. In addition, the businessman had one weakness: to observe people from the outside to analyze their behavior. "This is an amateur psychologist for whom people are nothing more than puppets," Johnson reflected. Around the perimeter of each room, he ordered cameras to be installed, and now David, having seen his guest off, was reviewing the tape. Here they are having a conversation. And then, when I voiced my proposal, the bum gets up, walks around the living room, lingers on one of the pictures and cries. Yes, he was crying on the tape. It was very plain to see the tears running down this Michael's cheeks. And what would that mean? Thought a puzzled David. The photo the guest stopped beside was of his half-brother Jason Patrick Johnson. Does he really know the bum? The question continued to torment my father. But if that's really the case, where did they meet? We should take a closer look at him. Julia was looking at pictures from a classmate's birthday party when David knocked on her door. "Offended?" he stated. The girl remained silent. Julia, without saying a word, ran off to her room. This was more eloquent than any words, and it could not be said that David liked it. "Well, you should," he said conciliatingly. "He's not a bad guy. You should take a closer look." Julia didn't know what to say. All businessmen wanted to be related to their own kind, and they didn't have it all their own way. But on the other hand, the girl did not want to become the spouse of some businessman's offspring. "Well, yes, what are they, if they do not have to fight for their place under the sun? Rich moms and dads are already all hustled up," she pondered. "But Michael, Julia remembered the recent guest and suddenly thought that Daddy David was probably right. There was something about this guy. I guess that's charisma. And real, not created by expensive salons and hairdressers. But marrying him, Julia doesn't even know him, and if she did, then what? Mockingly asked the inner voice, and the girl realized she wanted to get to know Michael better. Her gut told her that this guy wasn't all that easy, so maybe she should really get to know him, but without getting married, of course. Now Julia knew where Michael lived, so now she wouldn't have to look for him. Michael Pilgrim occasionally worked part-time unloading merchandise at stores. That's what he did for a living. One of the places he worked part-time was a small store that sold confectionery. "Can I give you some more cake?" With a motherly look at Michael, Ann Adamson, the store owner, suggested. She really liked the guy. When Michael came to work part-time, and always, but where would he get one? "How long have you two known each other?" Julia asked Ben as they left the store. "No," he shrugged. "I've been coming here part-time for a few months." "Tell me a little about yourself," she asked. "Wouldn't you like to?" But Julia was silent. Something told her that Ben might not like her question. But having said, speak, she looked at him with interest and was definitely waiting for an answer. Julia continued, "Wouldn't you like to get an education, get a good job, and in general live like a normal person, you mean?" Ben asked mockingly. "What's your problem? How am I supposed to live?" "There's no sadness," the surprised girl replied. "It's just that everything is easy for you." The tramp cut him off and walked toward the bus stop. Julia stared after him in despair, and suddenly, as if not realizing what she was doing, ran after him. "Ben," she shouted. But the boy didn't even turn around. Ben, Julia caught up with the tramp after all, and just in time. Because at that moment a bus was coming, heading towards the bus station, and the girl miraculously managed to jump on it. "Ben, or did I ask you?" she exclaimed. "For someone like you, maybe nothing." Ben shrugged. "Well, to anyone. Everyone's the same. Everyone." Not everyone. Ben realized with horror that he was attracted to this girl, but he realized there was no future for them. No matter what her father said, Ben would be something to him. And then he suddenly remembered how this guy had offered him Julia as his wife, and he hadn't failed to publicize it. He said she was going to university. She'd be a translator or something. So he said, "Good daddy, he doesn't even know what his daughter will be when she graduates. He doesn't seem to want to know." That's how you treat a kid. Ben suddenly felt sorry for the girl. Why did he really yell at her? Those eyes like a hurt little girl's. "I'm sorry about that," Ben said awkwardly. "I don't know what came over me." Apology accepted. Julia smiled. "Ben, aren't you in a hurry?" No, he smiled back. "There's a suggestion we sit in a cafe somewhere." To be honest, she hadn't really hoped Ben would agree. But suddenly, "Okay," replied the hobo, "but on one condition." "And what condition is that my treat?" They sat in the cafe for about 2 hours and couldn't get enough of each other. How does he know so much? Julia wondered. None of these down-and-out majors could match Ben. "It's getting dark," the boy noted. "Yeah, it's getting dark early now," Julia agreed. "You should walk," he suggested. "What about you yourself?" chuckled his new friend. "I don't burn in fire. I won't drown in water." "You don't believe me?" "I believe," smiled the girl, looking thoughtfully into his eyes. You see, Michael was surprised, looking out the window, and yet she took offense. You might say, arranged her fate. The businessman looked curiously at the couple and waited for them to kiss. However, there was no kiss. Julia touched the tramp's shoulder and went home. "How was your day?" Michael asked good-naturedly. "Fine," Julia nodded. "Is that Ben?" "He's the foster daughter. So you two are dating?" "Daddy? Michael, you're so full of shit." The girl shook her head. "Ben was with us 3 days ago. 2 of those days I didn't go anywhere, so when would I have started dating him?" "Well, yes, Johnson nodded absent-mindedly. "I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking." "Well, then we'd better speed it up." As an intelligent man, Michael knew he shouldn't do it out of the blue. Otherwise, it could spook the target. Julia should be pushed into it gradually. But to the businessman's great joy, he didn't have to do anything. He hired a private detective to follow Julia, and a week later the Bloodhound reported that the young people were dating. Well, the plague, he thought with satisfaction, looking at the photos that confirmed that his adopted daughter had indeed started dating Skies. "Julia, what does your boyfriend do?" Michael inquired. "Ben works part-time at the stores," she replied. "As a salesman?" "No, of course not," Julia grinned, picturing her boyfriend behind the counter, unloading merchandise. "And is he okay with that?" "Why am I asking? I'd like to offer him a job at my place." "What kind of work?" Like a security guard or something. We'll figure it out. That kind of generosity was unusual for Michael. I mean, what's weird about it? After all, he had already identified Ben to take, and to tell the truth, the idea now seemed quite tempting to Julia. But the question is to get Ben to agree, she said thoughtfully. Why wouldn't he? He might, she confirmed sullenly. Michael was even more surprised. And how does he plan to spend the rest of his life in a shack? What, in the woods behind the train station? Julia wondered. And really, what is he going to do next? After that incident in the candy store, Anne had never asked Ben about his plans again. After all, he's a grown man and surely knows what he wants out of life. Julia silently shrugged her shoulders, and Papa Michael said, Anyway, dear, I'll say this, if you want to help your beau, and by the way, talked yourself into it. After all, it's in your best interest too. Johnson winked at his adopted daughter, and she felt uncomfortable, but deep down Julia really wanted to. So why not talk to Ben? What was there to hide? Ben Adams wanted to start a new life. He'd had enough of vagrancy. Although at first it had seemed to him in some way exciting, a kind of adventure, but it could only be interesting when he was young. And unfortunately is not eternal. Ben didn't like Michael Johnson, the slippery type. But on the other hand, was this any chance? No, he wasn't after riches, especially since none were in sight, and Ben wanted to be with Julia. And what could he offer her? Living in a dugout. So when his lover suggested working for her adoptive father and living in a mansion, Ben said that was probably an option. Well, what am I saying? Julia rejoiced. 2 weeks later, the former tramp and the entrepreneur's daughter got engaged. Michael's business partners, if they were surprised, didn't show it. They weren't interested in the identity of this poor man. Michael was also just glad that everything worked out the way he wanted it to. When Ben came to him for the second time, Michael said that he would keep order. When asked by the boy what exactly he was supposed to do, Johnson replied, make sure no crap got into the house. Michael was actually one of the residents of the mansion. Once handed over, his duties completely derailed. Everything would have been fine. But Michael puzzled over the question of how the future son-in-law knew his half-brother. In the end, the businessman decided to talk to him straight since Julia and this tramp were doomed. Anne, do you know where Ben is now? Johnson asked the elderly maid. I think he was in the garden with Julia. Well, call him to me, he ordered. Call him in, Ben asked, catching him in the study. Not summoned, but invited. We're practically related, the future father-in-law smiled, though the smile was more like a grin. So what did you want, Michael Vladimirovich? Ben asked impatiently. He didn't like being around this man. Ben decided when he and Julia got married, he would move out of his place. It was unlikely that the bride would mind. I was wondering what your connection is to my half-brother. The day I took you out to lunch, you were looking too closely at one photo, and I think you even wept. What do you mean? Ben saddened and began to tell his sad story. After the sentencing, Jason Johnson's attorney appealed, but all he got for his client was a penal colony instead of a maximum security prison. There he met Ben's mother, who worked as a cook. Uncle Jason was like family to me, the future son-in-law said. A good man. You probably know he died of pneumonia. Michael nodded thoughtfully, looking out the window. Where is your mother now after Jason's death? Ben's mother, Olga, didn't want to move on after that. They dreamed of a new life after Jason's release. By the way, he was given a lesser sentence, so the return was real. The young woman did not come to terms with the loss of her beloved and became addicted to alcohol. That's what ruined her. Ben sighed. Suddenly he was angry with himself. And why the hell am I pouring my heart out in front of this moral freak? This is my personal business. Go on, Michael said. Ben remembered what his uncle had said about his daughter. So Julia was that daughter? God, it was a good thing his future father-in-law and former stepfather had turned out to be half-brothers. Otherwise, Ben wouldn't even want to think about it. There's nothing to go on, really, he shrugged. How come you started vagabonding? After his mother died, Ben traveled to Boston for a new life. But the city didn't welcome him too warmly. The day he arrived, Ben got a job at a construction site and his passport was taken away. Fortunately, he had some money and he rented a small house on the outskirts. After a month, his paycheck was still not paid. He had to move out. The employers probably thought that without a passport he would not go anywhere, but he didn't. So Ben had to live on the streets. The bride's father was shocked at the turn of events. What a coincidence, some vagrant, the son of an alcoholic, turns out to be related to his brother. This did not make the businessman happy at all. He decided to get rid of the uncle and at the same time from the adopted daughter. But in order not to look suspicious, Michael would arrange their wedding. The newlyweds would be in his care. and then he would get rid of them both in one fell swoop. He was plotting a brutal plan to destroy the bride and groom. Johnson took over his son-in-law's paperwork. In early October, Ben and Julia became husband and wife. The wedding was modest. Why splurge if they were doomed anyway? But it didn't matter to Ben and Julia. They were together and knew that their married life would be happy regardless of Michael's money. They were determined to make a month's worth of money. Ben said after the wedding banquet, "That's the way it is. We'll live here, and then I'll raise money for a rented apartment. Do you agree?" "Of course I do," Julia exclaimed. A couple days after the wedding, they went to see Ann Adamson. Maybe she'd have some good advice, they thought. "Well, first of all, congratulations," said Ann with a smile. "And secondly, I'd love to help the new family." "Ben, I thought you said you worked in construction." "I did," he grimaced, remembering the way his employer had treated him. "But then you've got the job in your pocket. A good friend of mine is doing repairs at the cottage. It's nothing special, just cosmetics. Can you do it, of course?" "I can do it," Ben assured him. The acquaintance turned out to be a nice man of about 45. He paid the Johnson couple in advance. Part of the money they put aside to rent an apartment, the rest they spent on living. True, there wasn't much money. David Patrick Johnson had no intention of helping the new family. He wasn't expected to. Ben and Julia were eagerly counting the days until they finally moved in with Michael. Nothing else mattered. However, fate had it differently. Maid Amber worked for David Patrick Johnson for 20 years, and all this time she and Julia had a tender and touching relationship. The girl lacked a woman's affection, and this kindest of women, God had not given her children. How unfair is life. When you and Ben have children, they'll be my great-grandchildren, Amber said dreamily. But of course Julia smiled, just as long as it wasn't as a maid. That was the way she'd hoped it would be. "Amber, come into my office," Michael's commanding voice broke the idyll, which didn't bode well. "Is something wrong?" she asked timidly. "You'll find out," the master said. Michael informed the old maid without any preamble that she was fired. "But for what?" a stunned Amber whispered. "Why," Michael said. "It's your age. You've done your time. It's time to retire." The youth thing was jarring, but she didn't seem to mind it at the moment. Amber was more concerned with what she was going to live on. "You've been working here for 20 years, David Patrick Johnson added. "I'd like to see some new young faces in my house. And imagine if Jessica and I have a baby. And who's going to help them with the baby? You. The old one." "Yes, for me it would be happiness," through tears answered the old assistant. "Julia's like my own granddaughter, and now it's not a good time." He continued in his mind and ordered Amber to go pack her things. "Okay, I'll leave with dignity," the assistant said, and went to her room. Amber packed her things and tears ran down her cheeks. She considered herself part of the family. Well, it seemed the master didn't think so. There he was, easy on the eyes. "Amber, you'll take the check," David Patrick Johnson said, entering without knocking. He didn't even think about the fact that the maid might have changed clothes, but at least he didn't poke. "Thank you for that." What pleasure would she have had throwing that envelope of money at that arrogant face? Except there wasn't a dime in her wallet. The card was empty too, so she overcame her pride, nodded, and put the money in the big plaid bag. When Michael left, Amber counted the money in the envelope, and it was exactly half of what she'd gotten. She didn't bother to confront him. She gathered her things and, swallowing tears, left the room. She wanted to leave unnoticed, but that wish wasn't going to happen. "Amber, where are you going?" Julia asked, not without surprise, as she walked up the stairs. And when she saw the tears in her eyes, she realized everything. "What's wrong with you?" He frowned. Amber said bitterly, "Oh, come now, Mr. David. I'm old. It's time for a vacation. I can't cope, it seems." "That's not true," Julia said hotly. "You're doing a fine job. What's the matter now?" Sighed the one that colored her not-so-happy childhood. Suddenly Julia whispered, "I need to talk to you. I'll be waiting for you in the park." The serious expression on Amber Adamson's face didn't just say. It screamed that she was about to tell Julia something very important. She was even getting a little scared. "Okay," the foster daughter nodded. "I'll be there in about 20 minutes. "It was 20 years ago," Amber Adamson began. "I had just come to work for David Patrick Johnson, your grandfather. Back then," Johnson's former maid fell silent. It was terribly difficult for her to talk about it. "And what happened?" breathlessly Julia asked. "Then your grandfather was killed," the older woman whispered, and what a terrible guess flashed through her brain. But Julia refused to believe it. My father was in jail for that. Yes, for that, Amber Adamson confirmed in a trembling voice. The girl covered her mouth with her hand in horror. So this was why Papa Michael didn't love her. Everything fell into place. But he didn't. He didn't, Julia interjected incredulously. Then who did? Jason Patrick Johnson. Are you sure? Are you sure? Amber Adamson said firmly. I saw it with my own eyes. It was Jason Patrick Johnson who hit his father over the head with a candlestick and then flipped it around as if Michael had done it. Jason Patrick Johnson called him into David Patrick Johnson's office on some pretext specifically to set him up, and then called the police. Everything pointed to Michael as the killer. I mean, he kept saying he didn't do it, but who'd listen to him? I mean, that's the way it is here, isn't it? If there's a man, there's a story, isn't there? Yes, Julia said with a sigh. I'm sorry, girl, that I've been quiet all this time. I was just afraid that Jason Patrick Johnson might have straightened me out as well. Julia was shocked. And that Daddy Michael was afraid all along, she realized, afraid of being exposed. It was reckless of him to fire Amber. I guess he figured that since she'd kept quiet for 20 years, the secret would die with her. Well, it didn't. I understand, Julia said and burst into tears, hugging the maid. To her, she was like family, if not closer. For about 10 minutes they sat hugging, and then Julia said quietly but firmly, "He won't get away with it this time. But the statute of limitations. I'll do whatever it takes to get the case overturned," she said firmly, and took her cell phone out of her pocket and dialed the emergency number. Ben walked home after work and thought about the fact that it wasn't long before moving into a rented apartment. What are the police doing here? Ben was frightened when he saw a blue and white car outside his house. He loved his wife Julia very much, and the first thing that came to his mind was, has something happened to her? And when he saw someone being let out, his heart jumped fearfully somewhere in his stomach. Did Michael massacre his adopted daughter? Ben quickened his step, but a policeman blocked his path. Your papers, he said sternly. Please, Ben replied. Pitiful technician's daughter. You'll never get out of the mud, laughed her classmates. And 15 years later, Carolina sat at the railway station on her day off and looked hopefully at the people passing by her. On a small table in front of the girl were laid out a variety of papier-mâché figures, very skillful, and hand-colored with acrylic paints, small animals, birds, scenes from children's fairy tales. All this regularly attracted the attention of potential buyers, except that, having learnt the price, they immediately turned away sullenly, with the words, "Why is it so expensive? My Thomas can make such nonsense in a couple of minutes, and paint it even faster. What's all this money for?" Caroline only pressed her lips together in embarrassment. She was asking for nothing. But the inhabitants of their provincial town, who were used to saving money on almost everything, did not want to pay for the labor of her invalid father, even if she was also thrown into the mud every time. What kind of an exclusive you have that you ask so much? Caroline tried to sell figurines at the railway station in the hope that some of the capital's tourists would be able to appreciate these creations. But she was quickly kicked out. She was told to pay a percentage or get out. Carolina wouldn't have minded paying for her workplace, but the amount the racketeers told her was a mockery, 10,000 a day. Where am I going to get that kind of money? She asked the big man in the tracksuit, who was not shy of smoking a stinking cigarette in front of her. In a month, God willing, I'll be able to earn at least half of that. The burly man exhaled the acrid smoke into the girl's face with relish, then smiled wryly. Well, it's what you wanted, baby. This is big business, by the way. If you want, you can always pay for the place in kind. The man gave the girl a steely stare that made Caroline want to wash herself at once. Don't, she muttered grimly, lowering her gaze. I'll pack everything up and go now, then. The bully hummed disappointedly. Caroline shook her head negatively. Like, we could make a deal. The creep held out his big tobacco-smelling hand to Caroline. However, the girl staggered sharply to the side, warningly. I'm going to scream or call the police for help. Just try to touch me. The jock lowered his hand, and for a second it hovered in the air a centimeter from her face. Then he grinned and said playfully, "And you're not stupid at all, and you're beautiful. You shouldn't want to join our company. You should buy yourself some clothes. You walk around like a bum in your last rags." "I don't mess with bandits," the girl answered him in a serious tone and began to put her rustic luggage into a small sports bag given to her by her father. She was about to leave the platform when the bandit suddenly blocked her way with his massive torso. He looked down at her like she was a bug and smiled nastily at her. "Let me through," the girl mumbled without looking at him. The boogeyman in reply bent closer to her and in a low voice said threateningly, "You think properly, Caroline," he exhaled along with another puff of smoke. "Her name. You'd be better off with me, and it's in your best interest. You're almost out of high school. Where do you go from here? Do you know the connections I have in this town? If I say the word, no one will hire you. Not even as a cleaner. So you won't be able to continue your mum's career. I'll take care of that." "There's already someone to take care of me," replied the girl, boldly looking the scoundrel in the eye. "I said I won't come here again. Let me pass. Or I'll really call the police now." "Is this about your daddy, or what?" The man grinned and gave a bullhorn with the toe of his trainers. "He won't help you, if anything. And the police here think they all work for me." The thug looked around and added briefly, "Anyway, I've told you everything. Don't you say anything to him, and don't you pawn me off." Carolina, who turned 17 earlier this year, did look a little older than her age trim thanks to daily jogging and her technician mother's help cleaning the shops. And at the same time, slim as a graceful rose, she was admired by almost all the boys at school. However, because of the low social status of her family, no one, except for such criminals as this big guy was he himself looked no more than 20, did not consider the girl as a love interest. Caroline herself never looked for romantic adventures and devoted all her free time exclusively to helping her parents. But even if this scoundrel had suddenly turned out to be the last man on earth, she would never have agreed to be his date. The girl saw a couple of times as near the only nightclub in their town, gangsters like him left in the arms of young, disappointed, dressed in short skirts. Caroline didn't have to guess who they were. She was old enough to realize how complicated real life was. But even in her worst dream, the girl couldn't imagine such a shameful future awaiting her. "I'll give you a sweet life in this little town. Don't doubt it," said the scoundrel. Standing before this unpleasant force, Caroline began to feel herself slowly but surely overcome by fear. After all, she was all alone in the station, and there was no one to protect her. Fortunately, at that moment the villain's mobile phone rang, and Caroline, taking advantage of the fact that he was distracted, hurriedly slipped out of the bandit's sight. She returned home that day depressed and penniless. It was the last Sunday in May, which meant that she had the longest and most horrible week before graduation ahead of her. All her classmates would only talk about who and what dress to wear, and what hairstyle and manicure to choose for this important holiday. And guys will try as soon as possible to invite the prettiest girls of the school to the ball. And only Caroline, of course, no one will be invited to spend time at the last school party in her life. Nor will she have any dress, shoes, or manicure. "Honey, are you okay, Jennifer?" the girl's mother inquired cautiously. "You're all pale today. Didn't manage to sell anything at all." Caroline covered her eyes with her hands, unable to hold back the tears that were about to spill. "My girl, what's wrong? Has someone hurt you?" the woman asked again, clasping her crying daughter to her side. "I don't want to go to this stupid prom," Caroline finally managed to utter, trying to control her sobs. Jennifer stroked her daughter's soft, dark blonde, shiny hair and looked into her lovely golden brown eyes. "Honey, but prom is one of the most important days in any girl's life, isn't it? Are you sure you want to miss such an important event? There won't be a second time like this in your life," her mother warned her. Caroline only sobbed a couple of times, then sat down on the bed and began to wipe her eyes thoroughly with a handkerchief. "And it's a good thing it won't," she said. "What haven't I seen at this feast of female vanity?" The guests will all do nothing but show off their expensive dresses to each other and drink cheap red wine, while the class teacher and the principal discuss the biggest gossip of the year in a corner of the gym. Jennifer smiled at her daughter, but Caroline saw a slight sadness in that smile. "Are you really that worried about not having anything to wear?" she asked affectionately. "I've already put some money aside for you for a dress. And the shoes, you can have my shoes. Do you remember the loafers like that? I married your father in them." Her mother's eyes clouded with unpleasant memories. Sometimes Caroline marveled at how much her parents loved each other, even though they had lived together for many years and endured hardships. Jennifer had come to this town from a remote village where she had been raised by her grandmother until she came of age. Unfortunately, Jennifer was never able to enroll in any educational institution to continue her studies. The knowledge she received in the village was barely enough to keep her from starving. The young girl was offered only low-skilled work as a cleaner, or, even worse, openly obscene offers. In order to get a foothold in this place and make ends meet, Caroline's mother got a job as a floor cleaner in the office of a taxi company near the station. It was there that she met Michael, her future husband. Michael had been working as a taxi driver for several years and was earning quite well. He was immediately attracted to a modest, pretty cleaner who came to their town from the province. Her purity and openness touched the heart of the man, so that soon the taxi driver invited the girl to the first date, after which he and Jennifer began to officially meet. About a year later, the couple planned a wedding, after which the young people happily lived in marriage for almost 10 years. During this time they had Caroline, a charming daughter, the name Jennifer gave because of her great love for the flower of the same name. All this time, the woman continued to work in a taxi park, and her husband to drive the residents to the suburbs. The salary received by Jennifer was not large, but thanks to Michael, their small family steadfastly kept afloat, being able, though not lavish, but to buy everything necessary for life. The year that little Caroline turned 11, however, disaster came knocking. Michael was driving an elderly couple from the village back to the city. The weather that autumn was very wet, and it was raining constantly. Because of this, the driver had to be doubly attentive on the wet road, making sure that he could fit into the next corner or brake in time at the traffic lights. The elderly people Michael was driving, as it turned out, were very unrestrained and overly emotional. The elderly people Michael was driving were, as luck would have it, very unrestrained and overly emotional. They were constantly dissatisfied with something and threatened to write a complaint against the taxi driver. Because of this, Caroline's father, now and then distracted from the road, trying to pacify the nagging couple. At one of these sensitive moments, the man missed a warning sign and, unable to control himself, smashed through an iron fence, sending him and his passengers into a ditch. The car flipped several times on the steep slope before stopping its fateful course. As luck would have it, the elderly couple were virtually unhurt, with only a few scratches, while Michael's life hung in the balance. His right arm was damaged so badly that the man risked dying at any moment due to heavy blood loss. Doctors miraculously managed to save his life, but the mutilated arm, alas, had to be amputated. When the taxi driver regained consciousness, he could not believe what had happened for a long time. How could it be? He was the breadwinner of the family. What would happen to his wife and daughter? Jennifer managed with great difficulty to calm him down and assure him that life goes on. No matter what happened, they would always be together. And she would do whatever was necessary to get them through the... "Is it enough for you to walk the corridors to class with your mother?" she asked. The father refused at first out of pride. "It's not good enough for you. I understand how your classmates look at you because of that," he said. Caroline was embarrassed, but tried to brush it off. "To hell with them," the girl answered him, smiling. "I'm not doing this to amuse them, but because we need the money. You spend a lot of time on this weaving and figurines, and women are much more willing to buy such things. What about your studies? Her father looked at her doubtfully. "What about my studies?" "Studying won't run away," Caroline answered him simply. "I will trade at weekends, and first I will try the squares. Or the markets, then I'll go to the railway station. A lot of people pass by there during the day. Maybe we'll make some money." Michael furtively brushed a large tear from the corner of his eye. He thanked God every day for giving him such a beautiful, understanding, and supportive family. He could hardly have dreamed of anything more in his life. Except that it was a little hard without a hand. "All right," he agreed. "But only after work, straight home. I don't want you to fall behind in your classes because of this." "Don't worry," laughed back her daughter. "I learn new material quickly. As my teachers tell me, everything will be fine." Caroline shook her father's hand encouragingly and thought about how much she loved her family. For the sake of these people, she was ready to endure any difficulties, as long as they were healthy, fed, and had the opportunity to meet each new day with joy. Michael not unreasonably worried about the attitude of classmates to his daughter. No matter how friendly Caroline tried to behave with them, the school community flatly refused to accept her. Although the girl turned out to be the most attractive, not at all awkward in the class, and regularly received only excellent grades in physical education, other, more successful classmates only did that sought to tease Caroline at every opportunity. "What, Carolina? Are you preparing for your after-school program again?" Vanessa, the first beauty of the class, mocked her in the locker room. "Let me guess. Do you have an extra class today to carry buckets of water or not?" "Oh wait, must be obstacle course practice. You're jumping up and down the stairs with a mop?" Vanessa was laughing a hysterical, unpleasant laugh. Caroline had to restrain herself from saying something equally caustic and unflattering. The girl tried to avoid school fights, but it did not mean that she was ready to tolerate such an attitude to herself until the end of her senior year. "Vanessa, you'd better finish taking your weight loss supplements," she said calmly, tying her old trainers. The classmates' laughter broke off abruptly. "I'm serious. It's already melted your brains. You're laughing like a lunatic." Vanessa's face instantly contorted into a grimace of anger and disgust. Caroline realized she'd guessed right. Vanessa had been frantically trying to lose weight for the past few months to fit into the designer dress her parents had promised her for the prom. The only problem was that the size range of such outfits ended exclusively at size 42. "You little brat, you filthy little brat. You'll never get married with such a horrible pedigree. So you're wasting your time training and running 5 kilometers a day." The girl was ready to run even 10 kilometers. She spat out in anger. "The most you can be in this town is an elite call girl. And that's if you don't despise sleeping with a girl who's been mudding like a pig since high school." Vanessa threw with all her might at Caroline a dirty rag that the cleaning lady had left in the locker room so she wouldn't have to go far to get a change of clothes. The piece of cloth fell on Carolina's head with a loud smack, and all the girls in the room burst out laughing. "Serves her right, you upstart. Show her where she belongs, will you?" Vanessa was taunted by her friends. "You think you can open your filthy mouth here?" Caroline was shaking like a fever. She had never felt such hatred from others. More than anything else in the world, she wanted to disappear, to dissolve like vapor from water on a hot surface. She didn't realize how she had shouted in her heart to all those puffed-up puppets. "Choke on your anger. All you know is to wash the bones of blokes, don't you? You have no interests in each other's lives except money and rags. I hate you all, you puffed-up pussies." Caroline didn't realize how she had jumped out of the changing room. The girl rushed past all the other students and ran down the corridor right into the street. Once she was in the school stadium, she heard a chant. "Caroline. Class hadn't started yet. Where are you going?" Harry, the gym teacher, shouted after her. But the girl didn't listen to him. She ran 5 laps in a row before her heart was able to beat again. Caroline didn't know where she got her ability to run, but she was sure that everything in life is given to a person for a reason. And if she had the opportunity to develop this ability, then she should use it, especially since running was the only thing that helped her calm down and bring her chaotic thoughts into relative order. Trying to regain her breath, Caroline approached her classroom. The boys, lined up in a row and unaware of what had recently happened in the girls' locker room, looked at their classmate with surprise, and some with outright envy. "Watch and learn." The gym teacher waved his hand in Carolina's direction. 3 kilometers in 10 minutes. And your shoes are ready to be included in the Olympic team. Not like you idiots. To the left, go, 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 go. There was a loud whistle, and Carolina's classmates, with dejected faces, ran their standard 6 laps. "Well done, Caroline." Harry patted her on the shoulder. "Take a rest, bye. It's the first time I've seen results like yours in 5 years. A real talent." The gym teacher shook his head and went off to follow the older students, while Caroline sat on the sports bench and pondered his words. Sure, it was a little late for her to start a sports career, but could her running talents be applied in a more productive way? The answer to this question the girl has not yet found for herself, precisely because of the incident in the locker room, and also because of a series of regular petty bullying from other girls. Caroline did not want to go to the prom. However, Jennifer still managed to persuade her daughter not to miss such a momentous event. After all, it's better to take your diploma from them right away, so that you don't have to go there again, the understanding mother winked. But you must never show them that you are scared. And if you don't come to the graduation, that's exactly what you'll show them. Let's not give them something to gossip about. Okay, Caroline sighed heavily, but agreed. Okay, let this be my last fight. Jennifer helped to choose and buy for her daughter the most beautiful dress they could find in an inexpensive second-hand shop, a simple cut, but at the same time very elegant and refined dress in the shade of sapphire, which perfectly emphasized Caroline's slender, athletic figure and perfectly set off the noble and yet completely natural color of her hair. The wedding shoes, which Jennifer lent to her daughter, perfectly matched the outfit and Caroline's high hairstyle, which she had also made herself. "It's a pity I don't have any jewelry at all," Jennifer complained, looking sadly at the girl's festive look. "Why not?" Michael suddenly joined the gathering and grinned slyly at his favorite women. "Dad, are you what?" Caroline looked at him uncertainly, and in her eyes Michael read anxiety and worry. "Don't tell me you bought something for me." "It ended sadly," Caroline said with a smile. "I did." Her father nodded with a smile and pulled a small velvet box out of his shirt pocket. Caroline was incredibly embarrassed. Not only had her mother bought her a dress that was simply magical by the girl's standards, but her father had managed to throw away a considerable amount of money for her. "Why?" Caroline asked him guiltily. But Michael had already reached out to her and put a box in her hand. "It's a little miracle." "Open it," he said. Caroline opened the lid with a sinking heart. On a white velvet cushion lay a tiny gold pendant in the shape of a star. The 5-pointed beauty shone proudly with its rays, even though it was no bigger than a fingernail on Caroline's index finger. Each ray of the star ended in a tiny shining crystal, and when the light fell on the stones, they lit up a myriad of colored lights. "Oh my God, it's beautiful." Mother and daughter exhaled almost simultaneously. Michael smiled and said to the girl, "Caroline, I want you to know that you, for me, will always be a guiding star that will not let me go astray from the right course. You and Mum are my 2 brightest stars." With these words, the man hugged first his wife with one arm and then his daughter, who clung to her father's strong and reliable shoulder. "Thank you, Daddy," Caroline said through tears of gratitude. "I will never take it off. I will always wear it as a talisman." Michael agreed with his daughter that he would pick her up from school in the evening after the party was over. It got dark early in their neighborhood, and teenagers, when they're drunk, are a mess. You never know what to expect from them. So her father decided to insure the girl in case the drunken classmates suddenly wanted to afford too much. When Caroline entered the assembly hall, where the event was held, many of her classmates quieted down, not immediately recognizing the girl. She looked around, deciding where she could best sit so as not to draw too much attention to herself. When Vanessa suddenly appeared on the horizon, like a shark's fin in the middle of a calm ocean. The queen never walks alone. For some reason, Caroline thought at that moment the first beauty of the class was accompanied by her own entourage, consisting of 3 girls and 2 guys. And the whole company was heading straight for her. Caroline noted to herself that Vanessa didn't wear the desired dress from a famous designer. Apparently, she couldn't fit herself to the notorious beauty standards of the famous brand. Instead, Vanessa wore a perfectly tight, extremely short leather dress, whose coloring was somewhere in the middle between a flesh tone and the color of bronze powder. Good thing it doesn't blend in completely, Caroline thought. Otherwise, you'd think she'd come completely unclothed. Well, here's our Cinderella, Vanessa said, stretching her vowels. Cute dress. Did you get it secondhand? It's okay. It's okay. You can wear it once, and then it'll be handy for scrubbing floors. Caroline gritted her teeth to keep from telling her what she thought of her provocative outfit. At that moment, Vanessa noticed the gold pendant around her neck. How lovely. The classmate's eyes flashed and she reached out her hand to touch the jewel. Don't touch it, Caroline sharply brushed her fingers away. It's a present from Daddy, she said with a caustic grin. It hurts. Vanessa replied with a scornful arch of her eyebrow. It's just a cheap thing you bought on sale anyway. If I asked, my parents would give me a dozen of them, Vanessa said. She turned and led the other boys, who followed reluctantly after their leader. Caroline chuckled softly. It seemed that Vanessa's superiority was beginning to bore even her most devoted fans. After the graduation ceremony, the real disco began. Under the influence of good mood, invigorating music and hot drinks, everyone danced, as they say, who can do what they like. Caroline did not dance. She wanted to leave immediately after receiving her papers. But the headmistress asked her to stay and be with the guys a little longer, because it was the last time we were all together. Although Caroline was not particularly eager to continue the evening, she gave in to the headmistress' request. When the slow dance sounded, the hall was illuminated with soft and languid light. The girl saw someone approaching her. The figure emerging from the pink smoke was Andrew, Vanessa's boyfriend. Hi, Caroline. Andrew began, smiling languidly. You look really good tonight. Can I ask you to dance? Caroline was embarrassed. She realized that something was wrong. Why would Vanessa's boyfriend ask her to slow dance? Caroline had no time to react when Andrew's strong hands grabbed her by the shoulders and turned her around to face her rich classmate. In the next second, Vanessa spewed a huge amount of tomato juice from a paper bag at her with all her might. Caroline gasped at the nasty, brackish taste. The first minute she was afraid that she had poured real pig's blood on her, like in a popular horror film. Drink, drink, you cesspit, Vanessa said, pouring juice all over the unfortunate classmate. You miserable fool. What are you doing? Did you really believe Andrew just wanted to dance with you? You thought he liked you? Vanessa tilted her head and started laughing like a lunatic. The smoke and the light made it look like Caroline had been doused with something black like tar. Stop it, stop it. Vanessa, you're crazy. Caroline shouted back at her, trying to get out of Andrew's grasp. He released her, and she began to shake off the sticky, salty liquid. Her dress was hopelessly ruined, as was her hair. And what was most tragic of all, her mom's wedding shoes. God, how can you be such a monster, Vanessa? Caroline asked her in despair. Why do you hate me so much? Vanessa condescended to answer, smiling with all her 32 teeth. It's a joy to hate you. I despise you, Caroline. Because people like you are always trying to get out of your dirty hole, like mice waiting for someone to deliver cheese for them outside. You should know your place and keep your head down, Vanessa said. What do you think? I didn't see you flashing your legs at our boys in gym class. What, Caroline? From the shock, Caroline struggled to speak. Vanessa, come on. I'm just a good runner. And it's nobody's fault that you can't stop eating fries in packs. Apparently, that last remark had finally pissed Vanessa off, and all the anger and meanness that had been in her until that moment came out. She took a swing at her classmate. Vanessa sharply lowered her perfectly manicured hand and grabbed the chain around Caroline's neck and pulled off the pendant Michael had given her. Did you think you could be better than me? Vanessa whispered, clutching Caroline's gold star in her fist. But I have money and social standing, and all you have is your filthy rag, which you will use every day for the rest of your life to mop the floors of this school or some rundown hospital on the outskirts of town. Caroline lunged for the wretch, but Andrew grabbed her arms, preventing her from resisting Vanessa. Give it back. Give it back now. The girl shouted tearfully. You have no right to even touch him. You're the most disgusting person I've ever known. Give me the pendant back. Vanessa held the pendant up to Caroline's face, knowing full well that she couldn't take it away from her. Then she released the chain from her fingers, and the little star swung in front of her nose like a hypnotist's pendulum. You're a pathetic cleaning lady's daughter, and you'll never get close to being a normal person, Vanessa said in a thick, low voice. Repeat after me. I know my place, Vanessa, and I'm the pathetic daughter of a maintenance worker. Go to hell, Vanessa, Caroline said, glaring hatefully at the blonde in the leather dress. The resentment swept over her head, preventing her from snapping out of the feeling of all-consuming anger. Do it again, or you'll never see your jewel again, Vanessa whispered again. She wanted to throw the pendant on the floor to crush it with the heel of her lacquered shoes. But at that moment the general light flashed brightly, and the teenagers saw Megan's headmistress looking at them with all the sternness she was capable of. What the hell is going on here, Vanessa? She asked the rich alumna angrily. Then she glared menacingly at Andrew, who instantly released Caroline. The girl didn't hold back her feelings and slapped the henchman with an impressive slap. You filthy henchman, Caroline said through gritted teeth. Then she held out her open palm to Vanessa. Give it back. What you took, now. Vanessa. The headmistress looked at her reproachfully. Vanessa put the pendant back into Caroline's palm, being careful not to touch her, after defiantly wiping her hands on her dress. Megan, can I go home? Shaking with humiliation and resentment, Caroline asked her. My dad is probably waiting for me outside. She realized that at that moment she had become an absolute laughingstock in front of all the students and teachers at her school. Megan looked at the girl with genuine regret and said briefly, Of course, dear, go. Have a happy life after school, she added belatedly. But Caroline was already closing the doors to the assembly hall behind her, and at the same time to this horrible part of her now definitive past. After graduation, Carolina had been in a terrible state. For almost a month, not wanting to go out, she hadn't discussed what had happened with her parents. When Michael met her at the school and saw in what moral and physical state is his daughter, the man was ready to tear and throw. Daughter, just tell me, who are the bastards who did this to you? They're your classmates, right? What difference does it make? Caroline waved it off. Forget it, Dad. It was just some fools playing a joke on me like that. Luckily, I don't have to hang out with any of them anymore. I can't even see this school. Let's go home. The distraught father calmed his daughter down as best he could, but he returned home feeling quite upset. His sacred duty was to protect his daughter's own blood, and now this. and Caroline, a light-hearted person, flatly refused to reveal the names of the villains. Michael could not, with all his will, break into the school and shake this information out of the teachers. Jennifer reassured her husband, saying that if her daughter didn't want to talk about it, then there was no need to get involved, so she had to deal with it on her own. Besides, she assured her husband, Caroline always knows that we are close by, and we will always help her with everything she needs. Our daughter is very strong. If she needs our help, you and I will know about it, believe me. Caroline, meanwhile, was lying on her bed, clutching the tattered chain of her pendant in her hand. It wasn't even the dress or the nasty words Vanessa had said that hurt the most. Most of all, Caroline was tormented by anger for the spoiled gift of her father. She realized that the chain could be repaired, but she didn't want to burden her parents with it, telling them that she had just taken the pendant off and put it back to her. Caroline contemplated her future. Now that the hated school was over, the girl could for the first time consciously choose what to do with her life next. She realized that she had no prospects in this city. But to enter a good university in the capital also required a lot of money. And where to get it from? A regular part-time job. From the backwoods. And Caroline couldn't just leave her parents like that. They needed help, including material aid. The girl listed in her mind what she could do best. But alas, the list wasn't that long. Running, cooking, and the ability to wax floors to a shine. God, Caroline thought, was Vanessa right after all. And I'm not going to get anywhere in this life with these opportunities. Bitter tears ran down her cheeks. It turned out that her classmate, without knowing it, had predicted her future. But Carolina was not one of those who let circumstances overrule her so easily. Therefore, the girl decided to do the following. She wanted to work all next year to save a sufficient amount of money. After that, the girl intended to go to try her luck in a large regional metropolis. There she wanted to take a course in her profession, and maybe, after passing it, find a good job with a decent salary in the center. Caroline realized that it would be a difficult path, but she was ready to endure everything to change her life, thus getting rid of Vanessa's humiliating prediction. Having told her parents about her plans, Caroline sighed with relief. They were not against the girl to try to find a decent job. Michael and his wife were very happy that their daughter finally began to come out of that terrible state. I will continue to help Mom and Dad, promised Caroline. But I have to think about my own destiny. I want you to be proud of me, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to achieve my dream. A couple of days later, Caroline took her CV to a recruitment agency. She offered her services as a maid, and, if required, she could also act as a cook, preparing simple meals. To her surprise, the call came quite quickly after that. In just a week, the girl was already sitting in front of a female employee recruiting domestic staff for wealthy homes. The woman scrutinized her profile and then looked at Caroline intently in the eyes. What about your stress tolerance? Can you handle unusual situations normally? The girl was somewhat taken aback. It was the first time she had ever been asked such a question, but she answered nonetheless. Depends on what you mean by the word unconventional. The recruiter raised an eyebrow that was perfectly fine, like a thread, and began to curl her fingers. Well, for example, if you are suddenly insulted without reason, from your point of view, raise your voice at you, or, on the contrary, show you special attention, maybe even with elements of a slight flirtation. Caroline gasped in amazement. Excuse me, do you want to employ me as a maid or, with all due respect, sell me to a not very decent establishment? The girl realized that after such words she would probably never get a job. But she couldn't help herself. Whatever it was, she wouldn't let anyone humiliate her again. Never. The employee nodded her head briefly and made a note in her notebook. She then raised her eyes to Caroline again. Well, you answer more or less politely. And your reaction is quite adequate. I will report these points to my superiors so that they can make a final decision. You see, you've had 3 maids leave this place before you, and every one of them felt obliged to tell me in color that they were not warned about how bad it was going to be. Is that a warning? I asked Caroline, just in case. Consider it a warning, the personnel officer nodded. Here is our girl going into adulthood, she said slowly. God, I wish she'd do well there. Don't worry, Jenny. Michael held her close. Remember, you told me yourself that our daughter is a very strong person. She'll get through anything. When it was time to leave, it was not without tears. Her parents saw Caroline off with all the tenderness and warmth of their hearts, expecting her to come back next weekend to share her impressions of her new job. Carolina was picked up from her home 9-story building by a huge black business class EOE. When the girl climbed into it, it seemed to her that she was inside a cruise liner, so huge was the space of the car interior. The driver turned out to be a not very talkative middle-aged man, who calmly drove her to the desired destination. When she got out of the car, Caroline couldn't believe her eyes. In front of her stood a gigantic 4-story mansion, made in a completely modern style with glass and chrome metal constructions. Caroline thought involuntarily that the owner of this house must be very fond of shopping centers, if he had decided to live in one of them. She didn't voice these thoughts out loud, of course. Instead, she obediently followed the head housekeeper and housekeeper, who led her to the pool, instructing the new employee along the way. Try not to make eye contact with Oliver when he asks you something. It's best to lower your gaze and answer in a matter-of-fact manner. If you're cleaning a room and the owner suddenly walks in, you shouldn't fuss or pretend to notice his presence. Just get on with your work. Oliver is used to all the servants moving about and working almost silently. You're part of this house, and in a way you have to blend in with it and everything that goes on here. Often we don't pay attention to the owner's little quirks, the housekeeper continued. We only call the guards if we realize that it could endanger his life and health. Caroline was silent, but she felt as if she were in some modern fairy tale about an enchanted castle where everyone was silent and could not say a word to the cruel king who ruled this high-tech kingdom. The housekeeper's last sentence, however, surprised Caroline somewhat. Excuse me, I think you said something about quirks. May I clarify what exactly was meant? The housekeeper stopped and looked at the girl as if she were trying to see through her thoughts with invisible X-rays. You were not warned by the agency about possible irregularities, were you? She asked dryly. Do I understand correctly? No, why not? They explained to me that there were some special circumstances, but what were they? The housekeeper raised her eyebrows elegantly. Well then, you'll soon see for yourself. The woman led her to a large rectangular pool, on the marble terrace of which sat a young man reclining in a sun lounger. He was wearing large sunglasses, a bright red Hawaiian shirt, and white knee-length shorts. The guy looked to be about 24 to 25 years old. Judging by his relaxed manner and the way he was calmly flipping through the newspaper in his lap, he was the owner's son. Please, the housekeeper nodded to him. Caroline arrived exactly 10 minutes ago, as the master had requested. After that, the lady silently left, leaving the girl and the young man alone. Hello, Caroline greeted him politely. Excuse me, do you know how long we have to wait for Oliver? The man froze, holding the newspaper half open, and then looked at the girl in surprise from under the shimmering glasses. I don't understand, was all he could ask. Excuse me, but you must be the son of the owner of this house, aren't you? Caroline answered the question with a question. I just can't get used to how many rules there are here. I wanted to ask you about them before I met Oliver, she continued. The young man continued to stare at the maid in mute amazement. She, not knowing what to do in such a delicate situation, just stood there staring back at him. Finally, the man couldn't stand it any longer and laughed loudly. Caroline felt incredibly stupid, but still managed to squeeze out a weak smile. "Honestly, I've never had one of those before," he said through his laughter and came close to Caroline. The girl blushed instantly, not knowing if she could back away from him at least a couple of steps. The master's son came so close that Caroline could feel the fabric of his fluttering shirt with her hand. "Caroline, that's your name, isn't it?" he asked with a playful smile. "Did Amanda say it right?" "Yes, that's right." Caroline looked up at him again. "Now, Caroline, the owner of the house is not coming here for the simple reason that he is already standing in front of you. I am Oliver." Caroline stood still with her mouth open in astonishment. Without another word, the young man pushed his glasses back over his eyes, and then strode off at a steady pace toward the stairs leading to his private wing. He threw her a final glance without turning round. "I like you, Caroline. You are now definitely accepted. Please tell Amanda and ask her to come and see me when she has a free moment." With these words he disappeared, leaving Caroline in a half-faint with excitement. Caroline told the housekeeper that the master was waiting for her. She pressed her lips together and showed her into the back room, where she gave her all the necessary clothes and the key to her room. "Remember, we rise at 6, so you won't be seen or heard. And no matter how embarrassed you are, you must continue to do your job. Do you understand?" "Understood," Caroline replied, thoroughly embarrassed. Caroline went to her room to change. Thus began the working day for the girl. She soon realized what Amanda had meant when she spoke of Oliver's quirks. It turned out that he loved to host big costume parties with loud music, beautiful women, and expensive drinks. Besides Caroline herself, there were about 15 other people working in the house, and they all behaved as if they were exactly the same things in the young millionaire's mansion, like some floor vase or a painting hanging on one of the walls. It was of course very disconcerting to the girl that all the employees of Oliver's house were acting quietly and inconspicuously. After all, Oliver had clearly made it clear to her that he could socialize with them as ordinary people. Amanda, however, continued to insist on numerous rules of behavior even after her host had summoned her to talk to her. Well, Caroline couldn't cross her either. In the first month of work, she received a substantial advance on her card, part of which she immediately sent to her parents. Oliver remained an inscrutable mystery to her. He could easily walk up and kiss one of the young gardeners he paired with her. They were twin sisters and tended an incredibly beautiful winter garden, but at the same time he never allowed himself any flirtations of a certain kind with her or them. For these purposes, Oliver had far more experienced girls who could safely be called mistresses. One named Molly stood out among them. The long-legged, red-haired beauty spent most of her time with Oliver, and he in turn increasingly applied the definition of fiancé to her. The entire staff of the house concluded that soon the young people would be married and their master would have a legitimate wife. However, this eccentric rich man had a completely different side. Very often, especially in the evening, Caroline found the young man immersed in the affairs of his company. He would sit for hours at his desk, and sometimes Caroline was sure he worked all night long. She had never once heard him say a rude word to anyone in the household. And if any of the workers made serious mistakes, Oliver always spoke to them in private, locked away in his office. But his fiancée Molly did not share this peaceful coexistence with the staff. She was always picking on everything, shouting at everyone, and the young maids, including Caroline, tried to bring her to tears. "Why are you talking here during working hours?" she shouted at the girls. "Don't you have anything else to do? Look around, dust, dirt, carpets. You're not sweeping properly. Get back to work, you slackers. Well, when Oliver and I get married, I'll get to work on you. How many of you have Amanda taught you? It's all over the place. What are you looking at me for? Look me in the eye when I'm talking." Molly growled at them like a wild tigress, imagining herself the mistress of the house. The maids held on with all their might, unable to endure her terrifying screams and shrieks. God forbid Oliver should marry that Molly, one of the maids complained to her in the kitchen. Caroline, then we'd all be ruined. What can she do to you? Caroline asked her with a smile. She's not his wife yet. You're not panicking yet. Millie looked at the girl and said with bitterness in her voice, You just don't know her, Caroline. This is not a woman. That's jealousy and greed combined. Only in stilettos. She'd run us all to pieces, I'll bet. She's jealous of her master's every plate. The other day she complained to him that we were too pretty to walk round the house and charm him with our slim legs. Beatrice and Caroline laughed together, realizing how absurd the situation was, especially when it came to a man like their master. I can't lose this job, Beatrice continued sadly. I have a little son in the village with my mother. I work here and send them money so that Matthew will not need anything. I understand, Caroline said. My parents have always lived very modestly in another town, so this place is a real chance for me to make a name for myself. Beatrice looked out the window at the full moon hanging over the horizon and smiled dreamily. Oliver's very good, she murmured, as if in confidence. He has his quirks, of course, but he's not as cruel as Amanda says he is. I suspect she's made him look like that to us on purpose, so that we'll work harder and not relax. He is a little strange, Caroline agreed, and looked away from Beatrice, lest she should read into it the feelings. I guess it's all hit him too hard, Caroline muttered thoughtfully to herself. Who would have thought that the rich had more trouble than the common people? All the next night Caroline could not sleep for some unknown reason. Everything seemed to be going well, but her mind drifted back and forth to Oliver. I wish I knew what kind of man he really is. Maybe this bravado is just a mask, someone more vulnerable, someone she could probably help. A couple of weeks later, exactly what Beatrice had told her about happened. Oliver was going on a business trip of great importance to his business, and, as he always did, he took Kevin, his longtime cook, and his maid with him. The latter, to his great amazement, was Caroline herself. Why are you so surprised? Oliver asked her with a slight chuckle. I need someone I can trust 100% to clean my room and control the food I eat during the trip. I don't think it's a big deal. Yes, but you don't know me at all, Caroline objected. I haven't been with you that long. What if I can't do it? The young man's face took on a serious expression, and then he replied in a voice that sent shivers down Caroline's spine. Well, if you can't do it, then you and I will have to part. Or we can do it right now, if you're not sure you're ready for a business trip. Because that's what a business trip is to you. No, it's not. Of course I'll go with you, Caroline said with her lips pressed together. How could she be so foolish as to think that this calculating businessman could have a soul? If Beatrice was right about his worries about her father's death, he was either hiding them very well, or her friend was mistaken. Because how could a man who was ready in 2 seconds to fire another man standing in front of him at that very moment be worried? No, Caroline shook her head as she left her boss's office. Oliver could be anything, but he's certainly not a bereaved person in need of comfort. When all the things were packed and Caroline and Kevin were getting into one of the 2 large jeeps, one for her and the cook, and the other for Oliver and his guard, Kevin said to Caroline with a kind smile, Don't you worry so much, my dear. I've been traveling with the owner for years, and it's always been fine. It's only for a couple of days. There's nothing to worry about. Caroline answered the cook with a calm but somewhat detached smile. She herself was pricked by something inside her. A bad feeling plagued the young maid. Suddenly, looking up at the upper windows of the mansion, she thought she saw a familiar silhouette flicker into Oliver's study, for a tiny fraction of an instant. She even thought she saw someone's fiery red hair through the window. But it couldn't be. Molly had gone to some foreign resort the other day, and was not expected to return for another week at the earliest. It must be your imagination, Caroline said to herself. You should read less detective stories at night." With these thoughts, the girl got into the car. At first the road was good, and the way through a dense forest seemed to the girl even picturesque. But gradually, the closer they got to the wide stone bridge, the more potholes were encountered on their way. The driver explained to Caroline that the road had not been repaired for a long time, and therefore they had to be especially careful here. "You don't have to explain to me," she nodded, remembering the tragedy that had happened to her own father. The driver wanted to say something else to Caroline, but suddenly he was attracted by something unusual happening ahead with Oliver's car. His business car, which was considered one of the most reliable in the world, suddenly began to swerve on the road. Every now and then his driver was swerving sideways. "What the hell is going on up there?" was all the driver of the Jeep with the cook and the maid could manage to say. When the car in front of him went over the bridge railing at full speed and fell into the water with a loud splash. "Oliver," was all Caroline could exclaim in despair. But then their car began to do the same kind of pretzels. "What happened?" Kevin asked, horrified, his huge blue eyes now huge. "Are we all going to crash now?" "Don't talk rubbish, Kevin," shouted the driver, trying to hold on to the steering wheel. "I don't understand. I just had a full inspection last week. What the—" He didn't have time to finish, because their Jeep also failed to slow down and went full speed into the river after Oliver's car. Caroline couldn't remember exactly how she'd ended up underwater. It was just a protective reflex, and she opened her eyes, being already a few meters into the deep abyss. The cabin was completely submerged. This she realized at once. Sitting next to her with his eyes wide open was Kevin. Blood was oozing from the wound on his temple. And Caroline realized with bitterness that the poor man had obviously been hit when the car fell. He was dead, and so was the driver, who was almost immediately choked by the powerful torrent of water. Being an excellent swimmer, Caroline had good lung capacity, so she managed to get out of the Jeep quickly enough. The girl looked, trying to find the second car in the murky water. Finally she saw it. Oliver's car was buried up to its bonnet in the mud, sinking to the bottom of the river. After swimming a few more meters, she saw Oliver's hands floating in the water, which she grabbed and began to pull him upwards, away from the submerged car. With great difficulty, Carolina managed not only to pull her boss up, but also to drag him to the shore, and from there to the nearest road. There, Caroline was able to stop the first car she could find and call an ambulance. Until the medics arrived, the girl gave the victim all the necessary resuscitation measures. She felt Oliver's pulse on the shore, and making sure that he was alive, tried to pump out most of the water from his lungs. Although the man coughed up enough water, he never regained consciousness, so Caroline had to carry him on her back to the nearest motorway. Caroline's own lungs burned like they were on fire. Her legs were shaking. She was sweating and coughing. But she was determined to save Oliver. When the ambulance finally arrived, Caroline described the situation to them, and they realized that there was something wrong and called the police. Caroline and Oliver were taken to the hospital, where they received all the necessary care. As the girl was hardly hurt, she was able to visit Oliver after a few long hours, which seemed like an eternity. The man, who by then had come to his senses, thanked her profusely. "You said you couldn't handle it," he said in a hoarse voice. "You not only managed, but thanks to you I'm still alive. And I can imagine what you had to go through while you dragged me through those woods. I'm sorry, Caroline. I'm ashamed of the way I pointed out your place," Oliver said. "Come on, Oliver," Caroline said. "The most important thing is that you're breathing. My teachers at school told me I had a talent for running. I'm finally getting the hang of it. If I hadn't run so much, I wouldn't have been able to get you out. Except what?" Oliver asked her grimly. "Your colleagues Kevin, Nick, Matthew. They're all dead," Caroline said with a heavy heart. Oliver nodded understandingly. "I don't understand what happened at all. The cars were in perfect working order, I'm sure of it. Caroline Oliver glared at his young savior. Is something troubling you? Are you ill? Should I call a doctor? No, Oliver stopped her. No, it's not that. The young man reached into his jacket, which was hanging on the chair, and pulled a thick notebook out of the pocket, followed by a pre-prepared pen, straight from the cover. He wrote something on the tiny piece of paper, and tearing it off, handed it to Caroline. Now you are the only one I can trust. Caroline, not understanding anything, took the slip of paper from his hands. There were some numbers written on it, and the girl counted as many as 10 of them. But what are these? She asked. It's a code. Don't worry, it's not for the safe, Oliver joked. It's just from my work laptop. The computer is in my office, and I have an unusual favor to ask of you. Please, it will help me understand and solve a lot of things. Caroline nodded, and after listening to her superior's request, she drove back home. Meanwhile, an investigator came to Oliver's room. The policeman interviewed the victim and assured him that they would do everything possible to find the intruders as soon as possible. Intruders? Oliver couldn't believe his ears. So it wasn't an accident? I'm afraid not. The policeman shook his head. We have brought the cars to the surface, and judging by the preliminary examination, I have no consolation for you. Someone deliberately cut your brake hose, knowing that you would be traveling in very difficult road conditions, the policeman said. Oliver slowly leaned back on the pillow. Well, they got to me, too, he breathed out heavily. Your father's competitors, the policeman said. I'm sorry, but I've heard about this case. As far as I understand it, they never found who was responsible for Marcus's death. Oliver nodded briefly. I think it's the same people, he said weakly, feeling the familiar fear that the young man had been so successful at drowning out with alcohol all these years. Meanwhile, Caroline arrived at Oliver's mansion and went up to his office as inconspicuously as possible. She realized that all the cameras in the house had probably caught her, but she hoped that in case the security service was displeased with her, the owner of the mansion would somehow protect her in front of them. The girl booted up the ultra-modern flat-screen computer, then entered all 10 digits written for her by Oliver into the password field. Within a second, a blue wheel was spinning on the screen, and then access to the landlord's desktop opened up. A folder labeled Cameras clicked open. Caroline selected the appropriate date and the Garage tab, then waited for the video she wanted to see to load. Literally seconds later, Caroline saw the garage room. And then, the girl did not believe her eyes at first. A red-haired beauty in expensive shoes and the head of security, the man who was supposed to protect Oliver, entered the garage. He quickly looked around and damaged both brake hoses in the very cars they were traveling in today. What followed was an equally disgusting scene. After all, the deal with the police guaranteed her a reduced sentence, while her lover from security will receive the maximum. Thanks to Molly's confession, the ringleaders of the rival company that had ordered Oliver's father were quickly identified. As it turned out, they were longtime enemies of their family, the family of the oldest of the brothers, who'd always wanted to take over their grand business. Oliver, coming out of the hospital, realized a lot and completely rethought his life and attitude to people. The young man first of all forever stopped with parties. In addition, Oliver permanently canceled all the stupid rules and fired Amanda, who frightened everyone. After that, he hired a completely different, kind-hearted woman, who could not only manage his household perfectly, but also interacted with all his employees and co-workers as if they were family. Caroline continued her work in the house, but now they were very close friends. Their shared story of saving Oliver's life brought them together, and that was just the beginning. 15 years later, there was nowhere to park in front of the school where Caroline had once attended. The car park was packed to the gills. So many people had dreamed of seeing each other. And they'd all been classmates once. Vanessa, now an elderly woman, and once slim, stood in the middle of the hall with her husband at her side. The seated middle-aged man clearly didn't understand why he had been brought here, but he couldn't resist the will of his wealthy wife. Vanessa began to look even more full and plump than before. But whereas before her fullness had been almost imperceptible and had given her some of the glamour of her lush forms, now everything pointed only to deterioration and health problems, which Vanessa either denied or did not think it necessary to address. The woman could barely squeeze into a thin, sparkling dress, expecting, as it seems, an unforgettable wow effect from her old school friends. However, those who admired Vanessa, and those who just pretended to admire her so as not to be pestered, could not appreciate the outfit, for the many folds made Vanessa look suspiciously like a sausage. Then a huge black car, gleaming clean, drove up to the school building. All those who were in the auditorium and were actively devouring the delicious food rushed to the window. They were curious as to who was in it. When the doors of the luxurious leather salon opened, a graceful, slender, taut leg appeared. It was wearing graphite gray boots made of the finest suede. Following this, a beautiful young woman stepped out of the car. Thin as a bamboo stalk, but not too thin either. Her body seemed to radiate health and youth, and the modest smile on her beautiful face involuntarily attracted all eyes, like a magnet. "What's going on? What are you all staring at?" Vanessa said impatiently, pushing through the crowd to the window. The woman gasped loudly, and then her face twisted with envy and anger. A few minutes later, Caroline entered the hall, beautiful and blooming like a beautiful flower. Her classmates stared dumbfounded at her gorgeous suit, a tee of English fabric, her flawless hair, and discreet but quality makeup. No one could have imagined that Caroline, whom they had all mocked so meanly in their youth, would not only not lose her natural beauty and charm, but on the contrary, become the most successful woman of them all. "Hello, Caroline, how are you?" Vanessa stepped forward. "I see you're doing pretty well for yourself. How much do you pay your beautician? Or are you still doing it the old-fashioned way with a cucumber?" Vanessa laughed, pleased with her joke. However, apart from her, no one else made a sound. "Hello, Vanessa." Caroline greeted her calmly. "I just came in for a few minutes. I wanted to see you all. Take another look at my past. One last time to make sure I hadn't lost anything." Caroline took a few more steps toward Vanessa and pointed to her neck. There, as before, hung her father's gift, a pendant in the shape of a star, which the girl had bought with her first salary. "You know, Vanessa, you haven't changed a bit," the woman told her, enjoying the way her former classmate was literally bursting with envy. "You're still just as stupid, and your jokes are stupid too." Caroline looked at Vanessa from head to toe, and with one last glance at the crowd of her former classmates who had fallen from anger, boredom, and time, she slowly made her way back to the exit, saying one last time, "You see, life always knows who has done how much good and evil. Someone chooses to follow his star or gets a chance to become one of its rays. And someone remains an empty, shiny bubble for the rest of his life, from which the whole shell, alas, crumbles with time. Happy life to you all, boys." Caroline walked down to the door of the school. Her classmates immediately rushed back to the window. Oliver got out of the car that was waiting for her outside. He was still as tall and stately as ever, only now he wore a pair of slim-fitting glasses on the bridge of his nose. He was followed first by a boy of about 12, and then a girl of about 7. The children hugged Caroline happily, and Oliver smiled as he rubbed the heads of his offspring. Caroline turned round and Oliver gave her a long kiss, full of tenderness and love. Then, after the whole story of the cars crashing into the river, he suddenly realized how different this girl was from any woman he had ever met. Courageous, strong, unbending, like a stem of bamboo. She always knew exactly what she wanted and was determined to achieve it. And tender and shy at the same time, pure as a petal of the most beautiful rose. She gave him everything he was looking for in this world and more. When he proposed to her, she told him yes. It was the happiest day of his life. When 6 months after the wedding Caroline told him that they were expecting a child, Oliver finally felt that he was no longer alone in the world. Now they both had a chance to live the life. A bankrupt rich man came to visit his mother, who was abandoned in the middle of nowhere 5 years ago. And as he approached, that night, Walter's dreams were so vivid that when he woke up he thought, "That's it. I'm drunk. I'm hallucinating." His head rattled so much that he had no strength to get out of bed. The man rolled over onto his side with difficulty and slowly got up. There were pills somewhere. He pulled out the nightstand drawer, fumbled inside with his hand to dissolve the pill in a glass of water. Walter drank and lay down again. He dreamt of his father that night. He was angry with his son, swearing and shouting. But what he did to his mother. "You're selfish and mean," his father said. And Walter stood in front of him as he had years before, as a child, and did not look up. "Mother spent her whole life raising you, denied herself an extra dress. And you," the dream was so explicit that Walter could almost physically feel the slap his father had given him. It was at this moment that his mother had to stand up for her son. She had always protected him from everyone, calmed his father when he was angry, defended him in front of his teachers at school, scolded the neighborhood kids, taking away his bicycle. Where is the mother? His father was getting more and more unruly. He was about to take off his belt and give Walter a beating. But Mum wasn't in the dream. She never came to save her son. And that realization made me feel cold inside. Fear gripped his whole body and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Walter woke up covered in sweat. The man hadn't seen his mother in 5 years. Maybe she's dead, he thought, and that thought made his head crack even harder. Walter slowly looked around the room. Slowly he began to remember everything that had happened the day before. The bailiffs had shown up at the office yesterday with a notice that Walter no longer owned the firm, his accounts were seized, and he had to leave the flat within 10 days. "What the fuck are you guys doing?" Walter raged. "Let's get the hell out of here or I'll call security." The man reached for the phone to dial the number of the head of security, but the uniformed man held out an ordinance to him. "What's this? What are you pulling at me?" "Your paperwork's failing." Walter was confused as he read what was printed on the white sheet of paper. The paper stated that the new owner of the firm was Monica Kravchenko. "Wait," the man said in a more peaceful tone. "Can I call the owner of this Monica who is in the paper here? I'll try to find out everything. I know her." "Please," the man in uniform said indifferently. "Just do your best. We won't be here long." Walter frantically dialed Monica's number, not understanding what had happened or why she owned his firm. This is some kind of misunderstanding, he thought. For a moment the man thought he was being pranked, like on a famous TV show. Now the door will open and a film crew will come in. Everyone will shout it's a prank. A polite voice is heard in the receiver. "The subscriber is temporarily unavailable." "Shit," Walter cursed. "You can only take your personal belongings. Everything else must stay in the office." And seeing that his attempts to reach the new owner had failed, the bailiff pointed to the door. "Please." Still uncomprehending, the man headed for the door. On his way out, he mumbled, "I'll call the lawyers, I'll sort it all out. This is a misunderstanding." "It's your right." The uniformed man replied calmly, locking the door behind Walter. "Have a good day." Leaving the office, Walter dialed George's number. George was a childhood friend. "George." "We need to meet," the man said when his mate's voice came through the phone. "I'm in trouble." "No problem," Brother George replied. "Where and when?" "Let's meet at our bar on the seafront. Get there as soon as you can. All right?" "I will." When George walked through the door, Walter had almost emptied the bottle of whiskey. "Will you have a drink?" he asked his friend, and without waiting for an answer, poured the rest into the glass. "Goov, one more, and get something to eat." "You've got a lot on your plate." Bro George looked at his friend critically. "What's the occasion?" "You won't believe this. I got kicked out of my own office today. And they said my accounts are blocked, and I have to get out of my flat within 10 days. "So you see, they kicked you out of your own firm and won't let you back into your flat," George replied calmly. He sipped from his glass and took a bite of lemon slices. "Everything seemed fine with you, no problems." "I don't understand it either," Walter said in a stammering voice. "But the main thing, mate, you don't know the most important thing. They showed me a paper that says I'm no longer the owner of the company, but the new owner. Who do you think?" George looked with interest at his friend, who was already pouring from the bottle brought by the waiter. The man drank the whiskey, emptied the glass completely, trying to concentrate his gaze, looked into his mate's eyes. "The new owner of the firm is Monica Kravchenko." He said these words sarcastically, slowly, deliberately stretching each syllable so that George would understand faster. "You're Monica?" George seemed surprised. "How so? Did you sign the firm over to her? Are you stupid or what? It's enough that you provide for her with her boutique spas, foreign resorts. I wouldn't have thought of that. Then how did she come to own your firm and your flat?" George had a drink too. "I know." Walter slammed his fist on the table, drawing the attention of the other bar patrons. The guard at the door tensed up, stretching, ready to throw the rowdy customer out the door. "Let's ask her." He took out his smartphone and dialed Monica's number, which was marked as favorite in his contacts. But the caller was still unavailable. "No answer, bitch," the man swore. "How about the spa?" George suggested. "That's where the girls usually switch their phones off." Damn it, Walter poured the glasses again. In the morning, he could hardly remember everything that happened afterwards, seeing that he'd had too much to drink. To avoid unnecessary trouble, the guard asked the friends to leave. Walter was indignant, trying to fight with the security guard. George persisted in dragging him into the air. He was assisted in this by the guard. George shoved Walter into the taxi and got in the front seat himself. Walter didn't remember anything else. Walter woke up in his bed with the realization that it was no longer his own. He slapped his bare feet on the floor. The man stalked into the kitchen, hoping there was something to drink in the fridge. "George, that's the kind of friend you are. You could have supplied me with something for my hangover," Walter thought, unable to find anything that would help his health. Sighing heavily, he headed for the shower to get some relief and get back to normal. The jets of water were refreshing. For a moment, Walter's memory told him that the bailiff's paperwork had not mentioned his car. "I'm going to go see Monica. Let her tell me how she so cleverly took over my firm," the man thought, drying himself with a fluffy towel. He hastily drank a cup of coffee, pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, and left the flat. There was no car in the yard. Walter remembered that he had left it outside the office. When he took a taxi to the office center, he was happy to see that his Jeep was parked in the car park. From the car, the man decided to call the office. "Yes, Walter," the friendly voice of Mandy's secretary answered the phone. "Is anyone in my office?" "No, I'm in the waiting room. No one's come in," she answered. "And when will you be here?" Without answering the girl's question, he asked another. "Has Monica been in?" "No," I said. "No one's here." "All right, work. Anyway, listen, close everything up and go home. Get some rest. I'll call you later when there's news." The man turned the key in the ignition and drove out of the car park. He was determined. "Now this bitch will explain everything. She'll tell me everything. I trusted her like I trusted myself. How did she manage to pull this on me?" The Jeep flew down the avenue, overtaking cars, Trolleybuses, buses. Walter imagined Monica telling him, "Honey, it was just a joke and everything would fall back into place." Entering the entrance of the house where his mistress lived, Walter pressed the button for the lift. But the lift was still not coming. He stood for a while and decided to climb the stairs to the 8th floor. The bell to the girl's flat rang with a cheerful trill. No one answered. Walter pressed the button again. Finally, the door opened. Monica stood on the threshold. "You, what are you doing here?" she asked. But Walter pushed her away and walked inside. "You tell me what you're doing." "Yesterday I found out that you've taken over my company and my flat and embezzled my bank accounts." The man went into the living room. Monica followed him leisurely, wrapping up her dressing gown. "Why aren't you saying anything? Why are you flapping your eyes at me?" The girl looked at Walter confusedly, with fear in her eyes. Suddenly the door to the bedroom opened, and George came out. Now, confusion appeared in Walter's eyes. "It's you. What are you doing here?" he asked his friend. "I was asleep, as you see," he replied. "Why here?" Walter still didn't understand. George went to the bar, took out a bottle of wine and 3 glasses. He opened it slowly and, pouring the red liquid, handed 1 glass to Monica and sipped from the other. "Shall we drink?" He nodded at the glass. "I'm driving," Walter replied. The absurdity of the situation kept him from realizing what was happening. But he was beginning to realize the worst of it. His best friend was sleeping with his girlfriend, and his girlfriend had somehow robbed him of everything he had earned over the past years. "Will you explain something to me?" Walter plopped down on the couch, folded his arms across his chest, and prepared to listen to his lover and his friend's explanations. "I'm asking both of you," he raised his voice, glancing at George and the girl. "Don't you yell," George told him calmly. "Not at home. In fact, you don't even have a home anymore. Monica owns the flat as well as the firm. So it's not in your best interest to make a fuss here. If you behave well, we'll leave you some money for the first time," said George. "You will? You'll leave me some?" Walter jumped up from the couch, grabbed George by the neck, and started to shake him. But the man pushed him with such force that he was instantly back where he had been. Walter wrapped his arms around his head. Everything that was happening seemed like a terrible dream, a nightmare, a delusion. "So you're the one who pulled this off and left me with nothing." It finally dawned on Walter that this was no joke, no prank. "What do you think?" George asked wryly. "Monica wouldn't do such a thing. She's not very clever, as you know, but she has many other talents." "Yes, Monica." George put his arm round the girl's waist and held her close to him. He looked victorious next to Walter, who was devastated after last night's binge, humiliated. "How could you, George? We've been friends since we were kids," Walter asked in a quiet voice. "Friends?" George let go of Monica and walked over to Walter, who was sitting on the couch. He leaned over him, his gaze angry and prickly. "Is that what friends do? You always acted like a king, always taking the best for yourself. I had to make do with what was left. You had the best girls, the best clothes. Your parents even gave you a car freshman year. I was always your shadow, always rushing to your aid when you were whining, George, help. Like yesterday, I came to you as soon as you called. Only that was the last time." "Saying something like that?" Walter tried to get a word in edgewise. "Shut up and listen." George cut him off. "I'll be running the firm from now on. Monica is just a formality. Without her, I couldn't have gotten the business away from you. I mean, you were head over heels in love with her. Fool. But you've always been emotionally driven and you've never thought straight. You're also too young and overconfident. No, Walter, you have no sense of self-preservation. And in this day and age, you can't trust anyone. You hear me? Not even the woman who spends the night with you. And you're the one who likes to talk about your successes," George continued. "So how much do you need for the first time?" I'm not greedy. I can slip a few $1,000s from your old accounts. Fuck you. Walter got up from the couch, looked angrily at his former, now no longer friend. Then he looked at Monica. You're still a doormat, just like you were a doormat. You think he needs you? He'd trade you for another girl with longer legs. All right, that's enough. George interrupted Walter. Get out of here. Get out of here. And I don't want to see you again. George pushed Walter towards the exit. Back in the flat, he took out his suitcase and began to pack. A black anger was ripening in the man. She helped her father and mother with everything. She carried water, stacked firewood, weeded the vegetable garden. Gradually, her father even began to take her hunting and fishing. Her mother tried to teach her the wisdom of cooking. On long winter evenings, they spun, knitted and sewed warm clothes together: socks, mittens, hats, waistcoats. When Tiffany finished 9 grades, she was ready to leave for New York. The village slowly began to die out. The young people were moving away. Houses were falling into disrepair, left without owners. Having settled in the cities, the children took the elderly parents to their homes. When Tiffany's mother heard of her daughter's plans, she pleaded, "Daughter, how can we be without you? Who will bring us a glass of water in our old age? I'll go to college or university, finish, get a job and help you," Tiffany replied. "And my mother is right," said my father. "There's really nothing for girls to do here. I heard the other day they're closing the post office. We'll be traveling 40 miles for our pensions. Let her go. God willing, she'll do well and everything will be all right." Having reconciled, the mother helped her to pack her daughter's things, and on the appointed day she and her father took her in a pickup truck to the railway station. A month later they received a telegram. "Mom, Dad." I got into college. Tears came to the mother's eyes. Her father comforted her. "Tiffany's not stupid. She'll learn. She'll become a man. Maybe she'll take us with her." "Where can we go, Father?" "To New York," sobbed her mother. "Where would we go from our farm?" Tiffany was used to city life. After graduating from college, Tiffany got a job at a factory in the personnel department. That's where she met her husband. He was a foreman on the shop floor. For more than a year, the man courted the girl. He was 10 years older. So Tiffany was very shy of this grown man. But he was persistent, and after a year and a half, Tiffany and Stephen got married, planning a modest wedding. And after 3 more years, the works department gave the young family a flat. That's when they began to think about having children. But the years flew by, and Tiffany didn't get pregnant. Doctors said that she was completely healthy and did not understand the reason for the couple's childlessness. 10 years had passed since Tiffany had left her home village, moved away from her parents, and she was constantly writing letters to them. Dad and Mom answered them. But she couldn't go and visit her family. New York, with its frantic pace of life, wouldn't let her go. And yet Tiffany returned to the village. Only the occasion was not a happy one. One day she received a telegram from her father that her mother had died. Taking time off work, she and her husband bought train tickets and traveled to the funeral the same day. As they walked through the village streets to their home, Tiffany was struck by how different everything was. The windows of the ramshackle houses were boarded up. There were no flowering plants in the front gardens, and the cows and chickens could not be heard mooing in the yards. The village was dying. A few neighbors, mostly old men and women, stood at the gate of her father's house, black shawls tied around their heads. Tiffany walked into the house. On a stool stood the coffin in which her mother lay. The young woman cried as she crouched down beside it. She stroked her mother's head, her hands, gazing into her dead, peaceful expression. It was as if Mom was sound asleep. Only from that sleep there would never again be an awakening. After the wake, when the neighbors had dispersed, Tiffany and Stephen remained seated at the table with their father. "That's it, daughter. Our Mom's gone," the man said softly. "She was ill. That's understandable. It's just a pity she didn't get to see her grandchildren. "Daddy, we can't have boys," Tiffany complained. She noticed her husband's reproachful look and lowered her eyes. "Do the doctors say they're just throwing up their hands?" Dad asked. "They say we're both healthy," she shrugged her shoulders. "Apparently our time has not yet come to become parents." "It's not the time," sighed the father. "Sins do not give." "What are our sins, Daddy?" Tiffany got excited. "Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Sin is a multi-generational thing. You don't hear its reverberations right away. But you should repent for the sins of your ancestors." "Well, it's time to go to bed. I'll go close up the cattle, and you make yourselves comfortable. We'll talk in the morning." And in the morning the father woke up the sleeping couple and took his daughter and son-in-law to the forest. They walked for a long time along a narrow path until they came to a waterfall, a turbulent stream of water jets falling down from a high rock, creating an iridescent fountain of splashes in the sunlight. The spray played with different colors, flying in a fine trot in all directions. In the bowl at the foot of the waterfall, the water calmed down, allowing me to see the reflection of my face, slightly distorted by the movement of the water. "Take off your clothes," Father ordered. "Dip yourself in the water 3 times and cross yourself." "Am I not baptized?" Stephen tried to object, to whom the whole ritual seemed like nonsense. "Just say, 'Forgive me, Lord,'" the man said firmly, stroking his gray beard. "He might hear you. We're not Christians." Tiffany and Stephen went down to the waterfall bowl and did as their father had instructed. They walked home in silence, each thinking about something different. "At dinner," Father said, "the old people used to say, if someone dies in a family and a child appears in the same year, it means that God has forgiven the sins of the deceased. God is merciful. He will forgive our mom and give you children." Stephen looked at his father-in-law in surprise. Tiffany only spoke, "God willing, Daddy, God willing." A month later, the woman found out she was pregnant. And in May, she and her husband had a beautiful baby boy, Walter. The couple was happy they couldn't get enough of the baby. The joy of the birth of a son overshadowed the death of Tiffany's father. The news that came from the neighbors, already after the funeral of the man, for 10 years of childless life they managed to save money. Therefore, immediately after the birth of their son, Tiffany and Stephen bought a cooperative 2-room flat in a new building, in which a separate room was allocated for Walter. Stephen quickly sobered up from the euphoria of becoming a father. He tried to teach his son to work hard, be responsible, and stand up for himself. But Tiffany continued to nurse him like a hen. "You're too hard on your son, Stephen," she told her husband, who made her 3-year-old son take out the bin. "He is still very young. It's nothing, he can lift a cup, but will he carry the bucket away?" On weekends, his father dragged his son to the park for a jog, made him do push-ups and pull-ups on the bar. And when he was 5 years old, he gave him to a boxing class. However, after the first bruise received by his son at the training, his mother flatly refused to take the child to boxing. "Do you want to make your only son an invalid?" She objected to her husband's arguments that the boy should grow up to be a man. Stephen was madly in love with his wife. It was difficult for him to argue with her. The man tried to avoid the slightest cause for quarrel, so in most cases Tiffany was able to win the right to bring up her son as she wanted. Walter was never denied anything. The best toys, a bicycle, beautiful things bought in brand-name shops, all this was taken for granted. Walter was not a stupid boy, though. At school, he studied for a solid 4. Teachers praised the bright pupil, but his discipline was lousy. With his friend George, who lived in the next door, they were always inventing new pranks. One day they bought a rat from a pet shop and put it in the teacher's desk drawer. When she opened it to take out her notebook, she nearly fainted. The mother was summoned to the principal's office. Blushing, she apologized for her son and promised that she would have a very serious talk with him at home. The next day, Walter and George broke a window in the teacher's lounge by throwing a basketball at it. Tiffany had to tell her husband. The principal strictly ordered that new glass be put into the window frame immediately, but the woman herself could not do it. As punishment, Walter was banned from the yard for a week. During spring break, he sat at home, looking out the window as the boys played in the yard. Still, Tiffany's son's childhood was no worse than other children's. In the 9th grade, Walter was given a moped for his birthday. At the end of the first year of the institute, his father bought him a new car. Parents loved their son with all their hearts, and no matter how hard they tried to bring him up in strictness, paid for his growing needs. After graduating from the economics department of the institute, the boy got a job in a large trading firm. "I'm not going to work for my uncle all my life," he told his parents. "Here I will gain experience, learn how everything is actually arranged there. I'll open my own firm." Father by that time had already retired but continued to work, having traveled a long professional path from a simple worker to the master of the shop, and then the head of production. He thought that trade was not a serious business. The man repeatedly persuaded his son to go to work at the plant in the planning and economic department, but he only waved him away. "Here is your factory, the last century," said Walter. "The future is in business." Dad just shook his head. He thought that business was all about bandits, while an honest man should work for the good of his country. He himself lived like that until the last day, every morning passing through the factory gate. Walter's father passed away without giving anyone long suffering and agony. One day he fell asleep and never woke up. He died quietly, in his sleep. Walter turned 30 years old that year. After his father's funeral, Walter felt he was in charge of the family and felt it was his time to make decisions. He left the firm, sitting in his room in front of his computer 24 hours a day. Then one day he said to his mother, "I know you and your father had savings. I've decided to start my own firm and I want to ask you for money." "How much do you need?" Tiffany asked. "The more the better. I need to rent an office, buy office equipment, but I also need money for the first batch of goods," Walter replied. "I'll give it to you." "Sure, son," agreed his mother, who was not used to refusing Walter. A year later, Walter was already the director of a trading company, which did not bring super profits but worked quite successfully. The staff was a few dozen employees, which son Tiffany paid salaries on time, and especially enterprising even encouraged bonuses and trips to seaside resorts. And he was in no hurry to return the money his mother had given him to start the business. Tiffany didn't ask him to. She was happy that her son was doing what he loved and that he was good at it. As time went on, and one day Walter came home and told his mother, "I'm bringing a girl over tonight, so make us something for dinner." Tiffany smiled. She had been waiting for her son to marry for a long time, but there was no one in their house except his friend George, with whom they had been inseparable since childhood, and suddenly Walter would bring a girl. Maybe they'll even announce that they're getting married. Tiffany would be sure to bless the young couple so that all would be well in their lives. She really wanted to babysit her grandchildren. Her son is in his 30s, and he's not even thinking about kids. Walter met Monica at a club. A spectacular girl in a short, tight dress immediately attracted the attention of the guy. Bright, with a defiant look. She was the kind of girl they say pretty devil. She sat behind the bar and slowly sipped her cocktail. "Do you miss me?" Walter asked and sat down next to her. The girl looked at him with an appraising gaze. Apparently she liked the young man, decently dressed, attractive, and when he pulled his wallet out of his pocket, took out a large note and handed it to the bartender, saying, "I'll have a whiskey and the girl will have whatever she's drinking." The pretty girl smiled white hot. Walter, the man, introduced himself. "Monica," the girl said, stretching her name slightly. "I mean here alone." "What are you interested in?" The girl was obviously flirting with her new acquaintance. Very serious, Walter said, and put his palm on Monica's waist. Be careful, she warned him. I might hurt you. How could such a sweet, charming girl offend a poor, lonely guy? I wouldn't believe it. Walter tried to make a joke. Here's to introductions, he drank, pushed the glass away from him, and said to the bartender mate, do it again. Monica, sipping her cocktail leisurely, looked at the man. Are you alone? The girl asked. Not exactly. My friend and I agreed to meet here, to have a little fun, and all that work and work, answered Walter, calculating the next portion of whiskey. So I'm the third extra? Monica made a jokingly sad expression on her face. Where does poor Walter work that he's so tired? Poor Walter works at his own firm. Wait, what's poor Walter? He's not poor. He's a very rich man. He started to flounder a bit. There's my friend George. George came to the counter. Walter introduced George to his new girlfriend, and the group moved into the lounge and took a table. Walter found himself liking Monica more and more. No cooking. I hate the cooker and everything that goes with it, she said flatly. Why don't we go out and have lunch? Where? A restaurant, for example. Let's do that. Walter decided that this wonderful night must have a beautiful ending. I'll just make one phone call, he said. Okay. I'm going to take a shower. Wrapped in a sheet, Monica stalked down the corridor. Tiffany was in a hurry to get home from work. She had to run to the shop to buy cheese and sausage. Today her son would bring his girlfriend to meet her. That thought made her happy. Surely this girl from his work. She's probably smart, kind, and very pretty. There's no other way around it. Her boy won't go out with just anyone. After changing her clothes, the housewife put on an apron and began to prepare dinner. She sent the chicken, carefully marinated since the morning, into the oven and began to prepare the appetizers. In the living room, she spread a beautiful tablecloth on the table and arranged the dishes and utensils. Tiffany was almost ready when the doorbell rang. She hurried into the hallway. Mom, we're here. Walter greeted her mother cheerfully, kissing her on the cheek. This is Monica. Pleased to meet you, the woman replied, looking at the girl with a smile. She looked nothing like the image Tiffany had painted in her mind of her future daughter-in-law, bright, tall, and wearing a short skirt. I'm Tiffany, she introduced herself. The girl smiled silently back. She looked around the spacious hallway with interest. Why are we standing here? Come into the hall, Tiffany invited her son and his girlfriend. I'll be right there, the woman went into the kitchen, while Monica continued to turn her head from side to side. Nice place you have here. Do you live here alone? Yes, my father died and it's just me and my mom, Walter said, uncorking a bottle of champagne. Why don't you get married? The girl asked. It had never occurred to me. Maybe I haven't met the one I want to spend my life with, replied the man. Are you sure? Or maybe your mom doesn't let you. Monica laughed, and Walter looked at her, not knowing whether she was joking or seriously considering him a mama's boy. Stop it. I have a great mom, he hugged the girl. Tiffany came into the room. When she saw the young people, she was a little confused. Well, everything is ready. We can sit down at the table. The woman had a dish with fried chicken in her hands. It smells so good, Mummy. Walter wiggled his nose. I love it when you bake chicken with your signature recipe. Thank you, son. Tiffany replied. Wanting to lighten the mood a little, she turned to Monica. What do you, Monica, like to cook? Can you share a recipe? Monica looked at the woman, then at Walter. I don't like to cook anything, she replied. I prefer to eat in restaurants or, At the very least, order takeout. It was Tiffany's turn to be surprised. How can you do that? How are you going to feed your husband and children? After all, we all know the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. That wisdom works, believe me. So you married Walter's dad because of your chicken frying skills? Monica asked, not the least bit embarrassed, reaching for the salad. Tiffany stopped chewing for a moment. She thought the question was downright rude and insensitive. The smile slowly slid off the woman's face. She looked at Monica, who was putting on the salad, not noticing that she had said something wrong. Sensing the awkwardness of the situation, Walter tried to gloss over it. Mummy, Monica wanted to say that you are a very good cook, and Daddy just couldn't help but fall in love with such a good hostess. He looked at Monica. She nodded her head. Yes, that's what I was going to say, she said, still chewing. The dinner conversation did not go well. After tea and cake, Walter and Monica left. I'll see Monica off and come back, he kissed his mother on the cheek. She continued to clear the dishes from the table. She did not say goodbye to her guest, showing her displeasure with her son's choice. When the son returned home, Tiffany was about to go to bed. She took a sedative. The woman couldn't get over Walter's girlfriend. She seemed rude, defiant. She was nothing like Tiffany had imagined her future daughter-in-law to be. Mama, are you still awake? Walter asked, peering into his mother's bedroom. No, son, she sighed. Your friend made my blood pressure skyrocket, and I had to take medicine. Mom, why do you have to make things so complicated? The man was indignant. Monica's a normal, modern girl. If she doesn't want to stand at the cooker, she doesn't have to. Nowadays you can really order ready meals, and the laundry can be delivered to the laundrette. Specially trained people can clean the house too. Why bother? Is it not normal that a woman wants to be beautiful and well-groomed, not tortured by constant cooking, laundry, and cleaning? Do you think I'm tortured? Tiffany asked. Yes, all the years I took care of your father. He always had clean, ironed shirts, and he was always well-fed, and the delicious dumplings we used to make together. Don't you remember? And this one of yours probably has no idea how normal people make dumplings, pies, or where clean linen comes from in the cupboard. Mom, this is my choice in my life. Walter tried to argue with his mother. She doesn't want anything from you but money. Look at her. She's dressed like Tiffany almost swore, though she wasn't in the habit of doing that. I'm sorry, God. If your father had seen that tarnished, tastelessly dressed and ill-mannered girl. Here we go. I'm going to bed. I have to get up early tomorrow, said Walter. He walked out of his mother's bedroom, closing the door behind him. Tiffany sat at the dressing table for a while longer, looking at her face in the mirror. Since her husband's death, she had visibly deteriorated. Her face showed signs of fatigue. Maybe I should retire, she thought. It wasn't the first time Tiffany had thought it was time to stop working. Her health was failing more and more. Her eyesight was getting worse. Then there were the computers that now had to be mastered. Tiffany was having a hard time. The younger generation, on the other hand, was getting up to speed and not afraid to work with any software. It's decided I'll talk to the boss tomorrow. If there is a candidate to take my place, I'll make way for the young people and go on a well-deserved holiday, she decided. Walter's mood was high. His trading company was 1 year old. As director and owner, he could see the results. Profits were growing. There were more and more partners, and the accounts were finally beginning to show a substantial amount of money. On this occasion, the man decided to thank his employees and organize a party. The staff took the news with enthusiasm. It was decided to free the meeting room, decorate it, and order catering with snacks, drinks, and dishes from the restaurant. On the appointed day, everyone gathered to celebrate the firm's anniversary. George and Monica were also invited. Dear friends, colleagues, Walter addressed the audience. I am happy that we are celebrating the first birthday of our company. I would like to thank you for believing in the success of our business from day one and doing everything to make it grow, bring us success and profit. Thank you. The people applauded loudly. I had no idea that your employees loved and respected you so much, Monica said, hugging Walter around the neck. All evening she had been showing that she was directly related to the director, that she was not just his girlfriend but his favorite girl. Monica had far-reaching plans for Walter. Except his mother Tiffany might be a problem. The other day Walter gave Monica a luxurious fur coat. However, the gift was not bought on the man's initiative. They were driving through town, and Monica saw a fur store. She asked to come in, because she really likes beautiful fur coats and mantos. The man was unable to object. The girl drove him crazy, and he could not give up his love adventures with Monica. Laving between the racks of coats and mantos, the girl tried on one or the other. At last she came out to Walter, who was drinking coffee on a sofa, spinning round and round. The blue mink coat was very much to the face of the tall and slender Monica. But the price tag that dangled from the sleeve confused Walter. Honey, Monica pouted with greasy scarlet lipstick. Don't I deserve such a gift from you? Look at something else, darling. And preferably this number should be one less zero, the man suggested. No, I want this one. It suits me very well. Don't you think it's a little overpriced? It's overpriced. In Europe you can buy much cheaper. Walter tried to dissuade the girl from buying it. But Monica stood her ground. The man had to agree. Wrap it up, he said to the saleswoman, slightly damaging his mood. Prevented Walter from rejoicing in the renewal together with Monica. But very soon the girl was able to lift his spirits by dragging him to her house. He returned home at midnight. The morning coffee, prepared by Tiffany, was invigorating and set him up for work. Walter stepped out of the shower and joined his mother. The woman carefully tossed her son a plate of sandwiches. Did you get home late last night? Did you have to work late? She asked Walter. No, he answered briefly. Where were you then? Walter put the cup on the table, hesitated for a moment, then answered in an irritated tone. Mum, what am I, 5 years old? Are you going to control me all my life? Where I want to be, I'll be there. When I want, then I come. What do you care? Calm down, Tiffany said. I was just wondering, Tiffany said. She was startled. Her son had never let her raise her voice before. It's just that you usually tell me how you spend your time with George, she added. Walter got up from the table, leaving the cup with the unfinished coffee. I'm out of here. Lots of work, sorry, he said, and turned around, leaving the kitchen. He didn't even kiss his mother goodbye. The conversation hadn't gone well, and the morning wasn't going well. In fact, Tiffany wanted to tell her son about her decision to take a well-deserved retirement. The day before, she'd talked to the head of human resources at the plant. And it turned out she'd been wanting her niece to take Tiffany's place for a long time. But only she was shy to say, because Tiffany had worked at the same place all her life and was honored by the bosses. The issue had resolved itself in a fortnight. The woman would be retiring, giving way to a new generation. Now she wondered how her son would react. Surely he would be pleased. Tiffany was already making plans. First, she wanted to buy a trip to a sanatorium. She'd wanted to go to Karlovy Vary in the Czech Republic for a long time. True, she would have to ask Walter to pay back some of the money she had lent him a year ago to start a business. But her son was apparently doing well, and he would give her the money. And then when she got back from her trip, she'd renovate the flat. It will be necessary to hire a good team of workers to do everything qualitatively and quickly. And in the renovated flat, she would be able to live out her life. That was Tiffany's plan as she planned to leave work. But that evening, Walter didn't come home again. After work, he went to Monica's house, taking her favorite champagne on the way. After a pleasant time, they lay cuddled together. "Walter," the girl murmured. "How about it?" What he said. "Will you marry me?" "What do you mean yours? Yes or no?" She whispered caressingly in his ear. "I will," Walter answered. "When?" Monica persisted. "Tomorrow, isn't it?" Walter finally came to his senses and looked at the girl. "Are we that bad or what?" he asked. Monica reached over to the nightstand for a packet of cigarettes. "I knew it," she said resentfully. "I knew you were just like all men. You come to me, and then you marry some gray mouse." "What made you think that?" the man asked, opening the window to light a cigarette. "If you wanted to marry me, you would have proposed already. What am I, a girl for an hour or something?" "Don't talk nonsense," Walter said. "Don't I give you money? I don't buy you presents. I don't fulfill your wishes." "That's all right. But a wife is something else. If a man marries, he proves his love. You love me, don't you?" "I do." "All right, if that's the way you want it, we'll get married." He put out his cigarette. "Then come to me, my little cat." Walter couldn't resist Monica. A few days later, he picked Monica up after work and they went to his house to tell Tiffany that they were getting married. To mark the occasion, the girl wore a new fur coat Walter had bought her. Let his mother see that he spared nothing for her. Tiffany wasn't expecting any guests. She wasn't feeling well today. Her blood pressure spiked. Tiffany sighed and stared into her teacup. "Oh, and yet the contagion is unapologetic," she thought. "Yes, Mum, tomorrow we'll go and apply at the registry office. There are some people we know there, so we won't have to wait long. I think we can get married in a month." "What's the rush? Is she pregnant?" The woman nodded towards Monica, not even wanting to say her name. "Are you crazy?" The girl was indignant. "I'm pregnant." "Well, no, that's not me. It's just that usually those who are in such a hurry are those who have noticed a baby in their sin. Normal people prepare for a wedding deliberately, thinking about every step," Tiffany said calmly and judiciously. "Walter, have you heard? According to your mother, we're not normal people." "I'm shocked." "Walter, why aren't you saying anything?" Monica echoed loudly. "Keep it down, please," Walter's mother asked. "I have a terrible headache." "Mum, it's what we decided," said the man calmly. "It's out of the question. We came with Monica to tell you the news first." "Thank you for that," sighed the mother. She sipped her tea, took a candy from the vase and slowly unwrapped the wrapper. "Aren't you glad? Don't you have anything more to say?" "I'm glad when you're happy. That's all I can tell you," Tiffany replied. "But since you come to me with news, I have something to tell you." The couple stared at the woman in surprise. Taking another bite of her chocolate candy, Tiffany finished her tea. "As of Monday, I'm taking a well-deserved holiday. I've decided that I've had enough of working, and it's time to take a break," she said. "Congratulations, Mum." "It's about time," Walter exclaimed. "Wait, don't interrupt me and listen," the mother continued, looking into her son's eyes. "First of all, I want you to know that I want to have a healthy holiday. That's why I plan to buy a trip to Karlovy Vary. There is good air, mineral springs, all conditions for treatment of my arthritis and hypertension." "That's great. I support this idea and I'm happy for you," Walter replied. "While I'm in the Czech Republic, I'll need to renovate my flat," Tiffany continued. "So I've decided to hire a team of decorators and have them do it right, so I don't have to think about how to fix it up later. I think it'll be enough to last me a lifetime." Walter looked round the kitchen. The flat really should have been renovated a long time ago. Especially nowadays, everything was done with beautiful, modern materials. And if they brought in a designer, they could make a luxury flat out of their 3-bedroom. In that connection, Walter, I'd like to ask you to return the money I gave you for your business. I'm going to need it now, Tiffany said. Walter looked up and stared at his mother. Monica looked at her lover in surprise. It was obvious that he was confused. His mother's desire to get the money back came as a surprise to the man. To be honest, he had already forgotten, thanks to whom he was able to start so successfully and turn the firm, as they call it, from scratch. I hope to get it next week, because I have to pay for the trip and give a deposit to the construction team, the mother added. The woman calmly finished her tea, pretending not to notice how puzzled her son was. Monica did not understand anything at all. Only one thing was clear to her: the wedding seemed to be on the verge of failure. It was not enough for the girl to sign and become Walter's wife. She dreamed of a lavish wedding with a museum restaurant and a huge number of guests. Monica was the first to break the silence in the kitchen. You know what, Tiffany? You should be ashamed to ask Walter for money. He's your own son, not a creditor. And besides, we have a big event coming up. Do you want us to celebrate our wedding in the dining room? Shut up, Walter said quietly. But Monica was unstoppable. You're old. You don't need much. Buy yourself a trip to a boarding house in Los Angeles County and relax for a month. You can renovate it in 2 or 3 years. What, do you have to have celebrities here so you can do a fancy renovation? Shut up, Monica. Walter tried to calm the girl down. No, Walter, I will not shut up. I'm your wife for 5 minutes, and therefore I have the right to decide where to spend your money. If I say there's going to be a wedding, there's going to be a wedding, or you'll never see me again. The girl literally jumped from the table, quickly dressed, and slammed the door. Walter tried to rush after her, but Tiffany stopped him abruptly. Sit down, I haven't finished, she said. Confused, the man slumped back in his chair. That's a lot of money, he said. You have to be warned about such things in advance. This money is still in circulation. Soon we'll have to pay for another shipment of goods. It's not even 1 lorry, but several. Do you realize how much money that is? I have no idea, and I don't want to think about it, Tiffany said firmly. When you needed the money, I gave it to you with no terms or conditions. I was counting on your integrity. Now I need it, and I want it back without disrupting my plans. Mum, don't you care about my plans? Walter asked indignantly. I come to you, tell you I'm getting married, that Monica and I are going to celebrate the wedding in a restaurant. And you don't react to that? How am I supposed to react, son? It's your life, your decision. What does that have to do with me? Walter asked. What does it have to do with you? You should at least be happy and at most help me, Tiffany replied. No, my dear. Everything I had to do, I did for you. You're an adult. You're well into your 30s. So the word should doesn't apply to me now. It's up to you to look after, protect, and support your mother in her old age. Or do you have a different opinion? You're being unfair by denying me the opportunity to marry, Walter said sadly. I'm not stopping you. Marry whoever you want to marry. Give me the money. And let's end this pointless conversation. Tiffany left the kitchen and went to her bedroom. Walter sat there thinking. He was working out in his mind how to get out of this situation without arguing with his mother and Monica, and without losing profits at the firm. He did have to pay for another shipment of goods, and it was quite a large sum. He dialed Monica's number, deciding to go to her, to discuss everything, and at the same time to stay at her place for the night. But she didn't answer the phone. She's offended, Walter thought. He switched off the kitchen light and left the flat. Getting into his car, the man headed for his mistress's house. The light in her window was on. Walter noticed this as he drove up to Monica's house. But when he rang the doorbell, no one answered. The man started pounding on the door with his fist. "Monica, open up, we need to talk." Footsteps were heard outside the door. Walter breathed out a sigh of relief. "What do you want?" Monica asked through the door. "Talk. We already did. I thought you were a man. Turns out you can't make up your mind without your mummy." "Yes, I can, honey. Open up," Walter asked. The door opened softly. A man stepped into the hallway. Monica stood with her back against the wall, her lips down and her eyes on the floor. Her whole appearance showed how much she resented Walter and his mother. "Well, aren't you sorry, honey?" The man tried to hug her, but Monica pushed him away. "Tell me, who do you want to live with, Mummy or me?" Monica asked. "Of course with you, my love," answered Walter. "Then why don't you consider me at all? Do I have to get married in a dressing gown? And my guests will eat Olivier and potatoes with cutlets in the dining room." "Don't worry, it won't happen. You just have to wait a little longer," Walter urged her. "I don't want to wait. Can't your mother wait with her silly whims?" Monica was indignant. "I don't know, dear, but we'll think of something together." So he pulled the girl against him and quietly pushed her towards the bedroom. Monica gave in. She knew what strings Walter could pull. Then, lying in bed, they thought of a plan of action. "Should we send your mother to a relative?" Monica asked. "Why?" Walter didn't understand. "To keep her out of the way. Don't you understand? Let her stay here. We'll have a wedding in the meantime. And when she gets here, you'll give her the money, or part of the debt." "She doesn't even have any relatives," Walter puffed on his cigarette. "She had relatives. Only her father and mother lived in a remote village, but they died a long time ago. I was just a kid." "Where's this village?" the mistress asked. "Somewhere in Montana." And I didn't seem to go into much detail. Didn't her parents leave her daughter anything when she died? If there's no one else, she must have inherited something. "Oh, please don't be ridiculous. What inheritance is there in a remote village? It's a small house, but it's probably rotten by now. My mother once went to my parents' grave and told me that almost all the houses in the village were abandoned. Everything was dead." Monica raised herself up on her elbows and looked carefully into Walter's eyes. There was triumph in her gaze. "That's the way out, my dear," she whispered, smiling. Walter arrived home on time on the appointed day. Tiffany noticed that Walter was acting strangely, always trying to give her something. Then he called her to have tea together and talk. After the fight the other day, they'd hardly spoken. But apparently the son had come to his senses and realized that his mother was right. Walter poured the aromatic tea he'd brewed himself into cups and moved the sugar to Tiffany. "How are things going at the firm, son?" the woman asked. "It's fine, as usual. We're working, making progress. You know we're not going backwards," Walter said, smiling. The mother thought his smile was strained, unnatural. "What do you do? Did you go to a travel agency?" Tiffany began to tell her, but her son interrupted her, asking for a clean hand towel. The woman went to her room, and he quickly pulled a vial from his pocket and dribbled it into his mother's cup. It was a sleeping pill. "Here you go." The mother handed Walter a towel. "Thank you, Mum. Now you can drink your tea in peace. You drink too." As they talked, the woman drank the whole cup and suddenly felt faint. She leaned against the wall. "I don't feel well, Walter," she said. But the man had already taken her in his arms and carried her into the room. He laid her on the sofa and hurried into the hallway to open the front door. "She's asleep." "Everything worked out?" Monica asked as she entered the flat. Yes, I think she's asleep. We're in a hurry. We have to get there before she wakes up. Walter took his mother in his arms and Monica grabbed a blanket and pillow from the couch. They left the flat and walked down to the courtyard. The man put his mother in the back seat, placing a pillow under her head, and covered her with the blanket. Opening the boot, he threw in Tiffany's warm clothes that Monica had collected. Several bags of groceries stood nearby. Slamming the doors, Walter and Monica hit the road. As they pulled onto the motorway, Walter increased his speed. He drove as fast as he could, afraid that his mother would wake up and his and Monica's plan would fail. By 5 a.m., they reached the remote village where Tiffany had been born and raised. They found her parents' house. There was hardly any snow in town, but here it was knee-deep. Walter made his way to the gate and struggled to open it, and then the door to the house. He went back to the car, carried his mother into the hut, and put her on the bed. "Where should I put the groceries?" Monica asked. She was standing in the doorway holding the bags. "Over there on the table," Walter pointed. He covered the mother with a blanket and put a coat on top to keep her warm. "Let's go, Monica." They closed the door and drove away. They glimpsed abandoned houses with boarded-up shutters, lit by headlights. Tiffany woke up and felt terribly cold. She struggled to open her eyes. Her head hurt badly. She tried to get up but fell back onto the bed, feeling completely powerless. "Where am I?" thought the woman. There were wooden walls all around. Faint daylight shone through the boarded-up windows. It took a while for Tiffany to realize that she was in her parents' house. But how she had come to be here, the woman didn't understand. The last thing she remembered was Walter giving her tea. And then darkness. "Masters, is anyone there?" There was a man's voice. There was a banging on the door. Tiffany tried to answer, but her tongue stuck to her mouth. "Hey," came another shout from outside. "I'm here," she said in a hoarse whisper. Her throat ached terribly. The door opened. A man with a gray beard, wearing a warm jacket and he unscrewed the lid of the glass and poured the hot, aromatic drink into it. Taking a seat next to Tiffany on the bed, he helped her up. "Here you go. It's delicious." "Thank you." The woman took a few sips and thanked him. "What's this?" "I make it myself. It's rosehip, hawthorn, and some other herbs." The man replied. "Do you feel better?" "Yes, I'm almost completely warmed up. And I'm walking, looking at the tracks of a car. From it, footprints lead to the house," began to tell the stranger. "No one has been in this house for ages, and now hello guests have arrived. So I thought I'd go in and check who had arrived. And here you are." "Who are you?" Tiffany asked. As she drank the hot tea, she felt invigorated. Her headache was gone. "Oh, forgive me, you old fool. I forgot to introduce myself," the man apologized. "I'm Oscar, the local forester." "Oscar? How strange," Tiffany said thoughtfully. "Why strange?" The man didn't understand. Tiffany sat up on the bed. She felt the warmth of the house. The crackling logs in the cooker warmed not only her body but also her soul. She looked round the room. The colored wallpaper had almost completely fallen off the walls. The ceiling looked back at her. Old curtains were hanging from the windows. "My mum made them when I was a girl. This is my home. You see, I grew up here, lived with my parents, then went to the city to study and stayed there. My daddy's name was Oscar. He was a forester in those days. Everyone in the neighborhood respected him. He was a very good man." Oscar listened in surprise at first, and then he laughed. "So I'm a forester too." "Oscar, like your father. What a coincidence. I never would have guessed. And of course I've heard that a very good man used to be a forester here. But I didn't know we were namesakes." Oscar laughed again. "How did you end up here? Where are your relatives and friends? The car you came in? I saw the tracks. A Jeep or some other off-road vehicle?" "I don't know," Tiffany said sadly. "I guess I don't have any family or loved ones anymore." The forester took her hand in his, noticing the sadness of her new acquaintance. "Don't jump to conclusions. Things happen in life," he sighed tiredly. Then he squared his shoulders and spoke in a cheerful voice. "If you've decided to stay here, you'll have to put the house in order. I'll help you. Do you mind?" "No, not at all." Tiffany smiled. "Who wouldn't want help under these circumstances? Thank you." All day long, Oscar and Tiffany tidied up the house. The first thing the man did was to take away the boards that had been used to board up the windows and fix the doors, which had fallen apart. Tiffany got to work scrubbing the floors and windows. After removing the old curtains, she poured water into a basin and prepared to wash. But Oscar stopped her. "You shouldn't have such old curtains in the house, Tiffany." "So what am I going to do without curtains?" "We'll put up new ones," Oscar said confidently. "Where are we going to get them?" wondered the woman. "If we look hard enough, we'll find them," said the forester in a mysterious tone. Tiffany shrugged her shoulders. The day was drawing to a close. Tiffany had already boiled the potatoes, cut the sausage, and opened a can of stew. "Your son was very thoughtful, not daring to leave him in the woods without food," Oscar said, but he immediately regretted it. Tiffany grew sad again, thinking, "Yes, that's the way it is, raising my only son. You spare nothing for him, and he takes you to the woods, to a cold hut." She sighed. "Don't worry so much, Tiffany. People live everywhere, and you're your own here. This is your homeland. The Karelian forest. It has some kind of ancestral memory, protects those who were born and grew up under its pines. Everything will be all right." "I know," the man smiled. Tiffany thought, "What brings him here? He's certainly not from around here." Tiffany and Oscar became friends. The woodsman visited the woman every day, helping her with chores. Oscar fixed furniture that Tiffany remembered from when she was a little girl. He brought water, helped with firewood. Tiffany fed him a delicious lunch. "I saw lights on in some of the houses, people living. I guess they're not leaving?" she asked Oscar one day. "They are. There are 10 houses left from the whole village," he replied. "Mostly the ones the children don't need, and the lonely old people." "What do they do here? Who keeps cattle?" "The vegetable garden feeds them. They go to the forest to gather berries and mushrooms. They catch fish in the lake, then sell them in town. And there's nothing else to do here. Televisions aren't always on." "Do they have televisions in the houses?" Tiffany got excited. She was bored alone. She was also bored with the soap operas she liked to watch in the city in the evenings. "Yes, but the connection sometimes goes down, especially in the winter." Tiffany suddenly got up from the table and went to the wardrobe. There were things that Miles had hastily thrown into bags. She found among them her card, which was to be used to pay the woman's work and pension. Here she handed the card to the forester. "This is my card." "What is it?" The man didn't understand. "I beg you, let's go to the shop and buy me a TV set. Please," she asked, her palms folded across her chest. Oscar thought for a moment. The nearest shop was 80 kilometers away. It would take all day to get there and back. But Tiffany looked at him with such pleading eyes that he couldn't refuse her. "All right, we'll take my car tomorrow," the man agreed. Tiffany smiled happily. She was growing to like this strong man with such a familiar name. He reminded her very much of her father. 2 months passed, summer came. One warm evening, Oscar and Tiffany were having tea in the yard. The forester had made a small table. Tiffany tied a tablecloth on it. The trees swayed quietly around them, enjoying the pleasant company and tranquility. The woman suddenly thought that nothing ever just happens. Perhaps she should have come back here a long time ago, she wondered to herself. She liked preparing the vegetable garden for planting. She liked setting up the house, making it cozy. Tiffany, Oscar said to her, "You and I are both old. We live here together and we don't seem to get bored." "What's there to be bored about?" "I'll plant a vegetable garden soon and then I'll take care of it," Tiffany told him. Yes, a vegetable garden is certainly something to do. But that's not what I meant. "Well, Tiffany, let's live together." The woman looked at Oscar in surprise. In his kind eyes there was so much hope, warmth, life experience. "We're hardly ever apart, Oscar. I mean, let's live together, run the household, and watch your TV series in the evenings." He looked so touching in his uncertainty that Tiffany couldn't stand it and held out her hand to him. "Come on, Oscar. It really is more fun together." Without hiding his joy, the man put his arms around Tiffany, held her tightly against him, and stroked her gray hair. One day, returning from the forest, Oscar brought a small fawn into the house. The animal was wounded and looked weak, almost lifeless. "What's wrong with it, Oscar?" Tiffany asked, putting aside the basin of laundry. "He's trapped, the little fellow. I guess the poachers were at it again. I had to rescue the little lynx." "Wow, a lynx. He's healthier than a big cat," said Oscar. "Bring the first aid kit, please." He treated the wound on the lynx's leg, applied a bandage with ointment, and calmed the animal down. "He'll stay with us for a while and then we'll see." An old dog box was re-equipped for the lynx. We had to renew the boards and make an enclosure out of metal mesh. The lynx was named Rex. This was the name of the previous owner of the box. But he was a dog, not a wild cat. The pet was very affectionate, licking Tiffany's hand as she stroked and bandaged him. A few days later, Oscar returned with a large box. There were a dozen chickens in it. "That's not nothing," he said proudly, showing Tiffany the chickens lurking at the bottom of the carton. "Now we'll always have fresh eggs." "Oh my God, Oscar, where are we going to keep them?" Tiffany spluttered. "It's not a problem. Tomorrow morning I'll start building a chicken coop, and then I'll build a stable. We'll have a cow, goats, geese, piglets. We'll have our own farm." Tiffany only shook her head, smiling and enjoying Oscar's thriftiness. It was not a problem for him to get the wood to build buildings. That's why Oscar decided not to be petty. And in just a month, not only the barn, the chicken coop, and the pen for geese and ducks, but also a new bathhouse grew in the yard of the house. Tiffany was overjoyed when the first smoke appeared from the chimney. "In time, we'll renovate the house," Oscar promised. "As long as I have the strength, I'll do it all." Once a month, Tiffany and Oscar drove into town to withdraw money from their cards and get Oscar's salary. At the same time, they would stop by the market and sell eggs, milk, and poultry to the vendors. The price was not high, but they did not want to trade themselves. They had to go back and do farming. Having made the necessary purchases, they would go home. One day on their way back, they noticed a car on a forest road. "It's not ours, some tourists, probably," Oscar suggested, and pulled up next to the unfamiliar car. "Hello. Do you need any help?" "Good evening." A man in his 40s approached Oscar. "My car broke down. No matter how hard I try, it won't start." "Let me have a look," the forester offered. He looked under the bonnet of the foreign car, touched and moved something. "It's bad, it needs repair," said Oscar. "Where is there to repair?" asked the man. "I looked on the navigator. There are no settlements nearby." Two boys of about 8 or 10 years old jumped out of the strange man's car. They were followed by a woman. Oscar looked at the family and said decisively, "Let's go to our place. Tomorrow morning I'll take you to the service. There's a cable." The men hooked the foreign car with the cable, and everyone settled down. Oscar dragged the broken car to the village. "Here we are," he said. And Tiffany, inviting the guests in, added, "Come inside." She led the woman and her children inside. It turned out they had traveled a long way. "We've wanted to see the local sights for a long time, but the car was a little slow," the woman said. "My name is Natalie, and these are our sons Miles and Nicholas." The boys sat down near the enclosure with a lynx, looking at it in surprise. Everything in the house and in the yard seemed strange. In the evening, everyone gathered round the table outside. Oscar and Natalie's husband Travis grilled meat on the barbecue, and the women prepared vegetables and herbs. For such an occasion, Oscar got a bottle of moonshine from somewhere. To getting acquainted to meeting. "Here's to your car being repaired quickly," he said, pouring it into shot glasses. Everyone present supported him. The evening was wonderful. Natalie put the children to bed in the house. They barely made it to bed. The hosts and guests all sat around talking, drinking fragrant tea with forest herbs. And the next day, Travis's car was taken to the service center. It turned out that it would be ready only the next day, and the men returned to Oscar and Tiffany's house. The guests had brightened up the homeowners' lives. All day the boys tended to the animals, fed carrots to the rabbits, carried hay for the cow and collected eggs in the henhouse, and then drank steamed milk. Travis and Oscar chopped wood and stacked it in a neat stack, and the women cooked meals. In the evening, everyone went to the lake, swam and boated, and when they returned, a real bathhouse was waiting for them. It was a wonderful weekend. "Thank you," the guests thanked the hospitable hosts. "We could not even imagine that this is such a wonderful holiday, and we really enjoyed it." "Come back again," Oscar said, shaking Travis' hand in farewell. "You bet we will, and we'll bring our friends with us," he promised, as the car with the new friends drove off down the street. Oscar said to Tiffany, "I think it's time to start building guest houses." All summer, Tiffany worked in the vegetable garden, harvesting crops and making preparations for the winter. Oscar got serious about building an addition to the house. He enjoyed having visitors, and in his heart he hoped that Travis would keep his promise and come on holiday to visit them. The man and woman went to the woods to pick berries and mushrooms, made jam and pickled vegetables, and in the long winter Tiffany knitted warm socks, mittens, and other things from the rabbit's wool. So the winter flew by, followed by spring. The elderly couple's household gradually expanded, and the chores became more troublesome. One evening they were finishing digging a plot of land for planting potatoes, when suddenly a few cars drove up to the house one after another. "Who's that, Oscar?" Tiffany wondered. "Let's see," replied her husband, and went to the gate. Travis walked towards him. "Well done, master," he shouted when he saw Oscar. "How are you? Are you well?" "Healthy, thank God," he said. "Tiffany, look who's here." The men hugged each other, happy to see each other. "Will you take me in? I want to stay for a week, go fishing, walk in the woods, just relax," Travis asked. "Why do you ask? We are only glad to have such guests." Oscar smiled, patting his friend on the shoulder. "But you see, I didn't come alone." "How many of you are there?" asked the owner. "Is this all of you coming to our place?" He pointed to the cars. "Yeah, we'll sort it out among the guests." People started pouring out of the cars. Men, women, children. And before Tiffany could catch her breath, she was surrounded by young women, shaking hands and calling out their names, asking her where to take her things and her groceries. To the house, girls, to the house," Tiffany replied, confused. Gradually, things calmed down and there was no more fuss. The women began to prepare the food, and the men set up some tents in the yard. What clever people, Tiffany thought. The children had beds in the house and the adults were in the yard. The noise, the fun, the joy of the children's voices settled into Tiffany and Oscar's previously quiet home for a week. The children enjoyed feeding the animals, going to the lake with their parents, and playing outside. The women helped Tiffany, even though she refused to help. After all, people were here on holiday. The men had plenty to do all day long, and they enjoyed it all because of the variety. Oscar even took the guests hunting. And how they enjoyed fishing. Tiffany collected gifts for the guests: socks and mittens made of rabbit wool, jam made of wild berries, pickled and salted mushrooms, and smoked fish caught by the guests themselves. For a long time the hosts hugged and could not part with their guests. They had become so close during that week, and when the townspeople left, Tiffany found money and a card under the tablecloth in the room, wishing them well and hoping they would meet again. "So we've made our first money on our farm," Oscar smiled happily. He felt that soon there would be new guests in the house, and he was not mistaken. A week later, another group of 3 families arrived. "Travis told me you guys have a great holiday here," said a man named Scott. "It's a good holiday. Come on in the yard," Oscar said. "Rumors abound, but good things come to good." A few years flew by unnoticed. Now, from May to September, tourists from different cities came to visit Tiffany and Oscar, some for a day or two, and some for a week. Oscar had built several summer houses, bought 2 boats, and installed a drip irrigation system. People from megalopolises and noisy cities liked to relax surrounded by wild, untouched nature. The hosts did not demand payment for accommodation and did not set any rates. After all, the guests helped them in many ways. But the tourists always left money, which Oscar invested in new buildings, the purchase of fodder for cattle and other necessary things. That day they were waiting for the next guests. "Look, someone is coming," Oscar shouted to the woman. "I think it's ours." A black Jeep stopped at the gate, and a man got out. He looked with surprise at the good house with beautiful carved plate-bands, at the strange man, at the links in the enclosure. "Don't you recognize him?" "My son is here," Tiffany said quietly, shielding her eyes from the sun with her hand. She took a few steps forward and smiled, bowing her head. "Hello, son." "Hello." Walter's legs gave out at the sight of his mother, healthy, beautiful, and cheerful. He hugged his mother and sobbed, stroking her head. Tiffany softly spoke the words that Oscar had once said to her. "This is our homeland here, son, the Maine woods. It somehow keeps the memory of our ancestors alive, protects those who were born and raised beneath its pines. It's going to be okay. I know it will."